Chapter 1452. Just as the people from the Lishan sect arrived at the heaven-patching formation, the true masters and sect masters of the various sects also hurried over. Suddenly, a bright light shone from a formation gate in the south. From within, a feather that was woven with bright-colored feathers flew out. As it flew, it shone with a colorful light, looking extremely eye-catching. At first glance, one could tell that this was from the Gong family of the eastern wasteland country. The Duchen sect master, Kai Pashi, sat in the pavilion and looked at the wind and clouds outside. He stroked his beard and said, "Disciple, the carriage you offered is really not bad." The sects of the Eastern Sea set off at almost the same time, but now, apart from the Clear Feather sect, only we are at the front. A young man in a Taoist robe was sitting in the lower seat. He bowed and said, "This is an item made from the wings of the thousand-dazzling bird. It was left behind by the high priest Gongtua. I heard from the Ziyue that this flying speed is similar to the true masters of the Eastern Sea. However, I have never ridden it before, so I don't know if it's true or not. Since Master said so, I believe it's not bad." He was Gong Chengjiao, a direct disciple of the Gong family. With his identity, he could have joined the sects of the 9 continents, but for some reason he chose the Duchen sect, which was located overseas. He was the second person in the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland to cultivate yuaning. It should be known that there were only 3 people in the 100 nations who could do so. All 3 of them were descendants of high-ranking officials. Their aptitudes were not bad, and the clans behind them had provided them with enough precious materials to exchange for cultivation pills. This time, when he heard that the few Shangjin had gathered the heads of various sects and Taoist Dongtian for a meeting, for the glory of his sect and to please his teacher, he didn't hesitate to offer the precious feather in his clan. Kai Pashi was very satisfied. Just as he said, the carriage flew extremely fast. With this item, the Duchen sect would not be so passive when facing those demons who could fly extremely fast. In return for a plum, he brought Gong Chengjiao along with him on this trip. "I have seen the true masters of the eastern wasteland travel. Even if I can't compare, I am not far behind. You have brought great honor to my sect." He didn't just want to save face, he also wanted to show that his sect was extraordinary. After the sects and clans of the 9 continents arrived in the mountain and sea realm, roughly 10 or so of them chose to establish themselves on the sea. The most powerful of them all was the Clear Feather sect, which had a celestial abode overseeing it. Sects like the Heavy Extension Monastery and the High Eminence True Monastery also had celestial abodes who had sent out celestial abodes, and were not to be underestimated. The Crossing Mortal sect believed that it had a long history, so it had always been secretly competing with the other sections. Once the Hope sect produced a heavenly abode, it would be able to join the Clear Feather sect in the south and the Clear Feather sect in the north and the south, becoming the leaders of the various sects on the seas. Gong Chengjiao was very clear about his teacher's intentions. He said, "Teacher, our eastern barren country has countless treasures and external medicines. Father said that as long as the number of disciples is increased by 1,000, he can make the decision to double the amount." Kai Pashi was a little hesitant. The power of the Gong clan was not small, especially since there were several great mystic realm cultivators in their clan. Although they could not compare to the celestial abodes, they were still people who stood at the same level. If the clan accepted too many disciples, Kai Pashi was afraid that in the future, they would turn the tables on him. However, he could not bear to part with the tribute. After thinking for a while, he said, "I'll allow you to add another 500 people, but no more." Gong Chengjiao was overjoyed. He did not expect to have 1,000 people, and originally thought that 100 or 200 would be good enough. However, the results far exceeded his expectations. He thought to himself that if he continued like this, as long as his cultivation gradually improved, he might be able to ascend to the position of sect leader as a citizen of the eastern barren country. Kai Pashi coughed and said, "I received news that this time, the meeting of the heaven-patching formation is about the matter of advancing to Junchin. Most of the demons there have long been killed. If we can occupy an Earth star and use it as a base for Junchin, the sect will prosper greatly. Disciple, remember to ask your clan to contribute some strength." Gong Qingjiao had also vaguely heard about this matter. Now that he had confirmed it, his eyes brightened, and he said, "When I return, I will definitely persuade my clan to send mystic realm cultivators and the foreign species slaves to serve the sect." Kai Pashi nodded in satisfaction. Attacking a star outside the world would definitely result in a lot of casualties. Rather than sacrificing his own disciples, it was better to make use of the people of the eastern barren country. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a bell. He looked outside and knew that he was about to reach the heaven patching array diagram. He decided not to stay in the pavilion and walked to the platform outside. Looking out, he saw a vast and boundless city in the distant sky. Countless Dharma boats were cruising outside, and there were also many Dharma carriages coming from outside. Since the Crossing Earth sect was established on the sea, it was his first time coming here. Although he might not be able to speak during the meeting as a sect leader, even if there were no celestial abodes in the sect, the other sects would still recognize his position. At this moment, he stood in the sky and looked at the changing wind and clouds around him. Thinking about the future of the sect, he felt very high-spirited. At this moment, he suddenly heard the roar of a dragon. Its power was extraordinary. Shocked, he looked back and saw a huge flood dragon flying over from the distance. On its back sat a young cultivator in a black robe. There was a vertical mark between his eyebrows, which looked like an eye. He felt that someone was looking at him, and his eyes turned, and a sharp ray of light fell. Although he had already restrained his chi dynamic, Kai Pashi still felt that his eyes were swaying, and his breathing was not smooth. He was secretly shocked and did not dare to look again. He took a step back and bowed to the person. The Taoist nodded to him, and then gradually left with the huge flood dragon and the group of demon birds behind it. Gong Qingjiao looked, and came up to ask carefully, "Teacher, just now, that person is..." Kai Pashi looked cautious and sighed and said, "It's the sect leader of Yaoyin Wei, one of the 4 perfected people of Shenyuan Cave Realm." Gong Qingjiao's heart trembled. So it's a perfected person of Shenyuan Cave Realm. He had long since heard that the Shenyuan Cave Realm was extremely powerful, with 4 perfected celestials and countless handsome disciples. They were many times more powerful than ordinary sections. He had also heard that one of them was in secluded meditation, and it might not be long before a 5th celestial abode appeared. Not to mention, there was still the perfected person. In the entire mountain and sea realm, there were only a few people who had reached such a level. It was said that such a person could destroy the sun, moon, and stars with a flip of the palm. He could not imagine such a scene. Kai Pashi stroked his beard and said, "Sect leader Wei has brought many disciples of Yaoyin Wei. This is also an opportunity. Qingjiao, when we get to the heaven-mending formation, you can try to make friends with them. It will be good for me, for you, and for the sect." Gong Qingjiao said seriously, "Disciple will remember." They were far away in the outer seas, and disciples of the Shenyuan Cave Realm usually went to the great wastelands in the western lands or to the clear sky to gain experience. Even if they wanted to make friends, they had nowhere to go. Now that they had run into each other, they couldn't miss this opportunity. As the day of the meeting progressed, more and more sects arrived at the heaven-mending formation. In the past, people had only heard of their names but never seen them in person. One by one, they appeared in front of everyone. On this day, 6 pairs of large, luxurious-looking blood birds flew in from the horizon. Their wings stirred with crimson light, and they supported a spirit realm Dharma carriage. Pavilions could be seen in the sky, and colorful clouds and dense immortal light could be seen. On the spirit realm platform, at the peak of the clouds, sat a handsome young Taoist with jade-like skin under a peach tree. If a perfected person from the spiritual sect was here, he would recognize him as the Blood Soul sect leader, Su Muqing. His eyes were exceptionally clear, and he wore a blood-red robe. It was like a scarlet flame dancing in the wind, and also like a ball of red ink, which seemed to blend with the mist around him. There was a glass pool in front of him, and amber-colored jade liquid swayed in it. At this moment, it reflected many scenes above the heaven-mending formation pavilion. A middle-aged Taoist stood at the side, and he sighed in his heart. The sect leader is only a Yuanying Dharma body, and he can already create this mirror platform spiritual reflection with his human heart. There is hope for the rise of our blood soul sect. He then glanced below and saw that there were no less than 10 Eastern Wasteland Palace cities on the Jade platform. He frowned and snorted. It's these people from the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland again. That Junchen realm was completely conquered by the 9 continents. Even if we want to invade this realm, it should be given to the sects of the 9 continents. Why do we have to share it? Su Muqing said playfully, does Elder D think this is a good thing? Elder D was doubtful, and he said, is it not? Su Muqing smiled lightly, and with a flick of his sleeve, a few stones fell into the jade liquid, and the scenes were all scattered. He said, Elder, you should be more open-minded. There are 300 to 400 heaven regions in Junchen realm alone. Even if only 1 or 2 out of 10 of them don't want to be controlled by the 9 continents, with the power of the sects, we can't pacify them all at once. Since that's the case, we must borrow external power, and the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland are the most suitable. Elder D was puzzled, and he said, then if we pacify the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland, wouldn't we be giving it to them? Su Muqing said meaningfully, then what if we can't pacify them? Elder D was startled, and then his expression changed, as if he thought of something. Su Muqing clapped his hands, stood up, and said, the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland don't have Reverend Ziyang, and if a grand mystic cultivator leaves the mountain and sea realm, his magic power and divine ability will be greatly reduced. Therefore, the transportation between the 2 realms depends on the 9 continents, and it's completely within our control. Moreover, the Eastern Wasteland is in the mountain and sea realm. If they know the pros and cons and know how to restrain themselves, it's fine. But if they are blinded by greed and fill the Junchen realm with their elite state warriors, I dare to say that the current rise of this generation will definitely be interrupted, and it might not be a bad thing for the 9 continents. Elder D suddenly understood. It seemed like the Junchen realm was a bottomless pit. There were indeed many benefits here, but the premise was that you had to be able to swallow them, otherwise you would be dragging yourself down. This method was actually using the Eastern Wasteland to pave the way for the 9 continents, and it was also an overt plot. You could guess that there might be such an intention, but you still couldn't help but jump into it. But knowing this, he still felt a little uncomfortable and said, it's still giving them benefits. Su Muqing revealed a beautiful smile and said, there's almost no end to the things outside the realm. What's more, we will face the threat of a great demon True Yang sooner or later, so it's a pity that we can't take it away. After all, the Eastern Wasteland is our ally, and we should take care of it. Even if we take some benefits, there's no need to take it to heart. Besides, the outer heavens are countless, and the 9 continents can subdue this realm, but how do we know that we can't create a new heaven in the future? As cultivators, we have to be more open-minded, and not only focus on the small benefits in front of us. Chapter 1453. Back in the 9 continents, the heaven-mending formation had 2 halls, the inner and outer halls, for the various sects to discuss matters. If there weren't many sects, then the inner halls would be sufficient. But if there were dozens or even hundreds of sects, then the outer halls would have to be used. The outer halls were divided into upper, middle, and lower halls. In the upper halls, there were 6 seats reserved for the Dharma pagodas and spirit mountains. Originally, only people from the Qinsong school, the Shaoqing sect, the Yuxiao school, the Netherspring sect, and the owner, the Heaven Mending Pavilion, could sit here. But now, only the Qinsong school and the Shaoqing sect were qualified to occupy these seats. However, considering that the Origin Mirage sect also had Shui Dingyuan, a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, they also invited him to sit. Currently, there were 6 people who could be considered true cultivators in the 9 continents, and each of them could occupy a seat. In the future, if there were more people who could reach this level, they could add more seats. Below the upper halls were the middle halls. Based on the situation in the mountain and sea realm, only Taoist Paradise was qualified to sit here. As for the lower halls, they were reserved for the various sect leaders. In fact, there was the lowest level, which were the scattered and small sections. Usually, the sect leaders were only at the first Yuanying stage, or at the core transformation stage. Normally, they relied on the great sects to fight against the demons and devils of the mountain and sea realm. They didn't have much power on their own, but because of the occupation of the Junshin realm, they had to use every bit of their strength. Today, they were invited as well. However, these people didn't have seats in the formation and could only listen to the discussions outside. Outside the formation diagram, more than 1,000 divine bluebirds pulled a cloud raft and flew over. Following the arrival of this mount, there was also a clear light that rippled out like water. After a short while, it slowly disappeared. Everyone knew at a glance that it was another Taoist paradise who had arrived. This strange phenomenon was caused by the aura and magic of the body being restrained. Someone who recognized him said, "It's Tao Jinren from the Clear Feather sect." Tao Jinhong waited for the chariot to land and then walked out. The Taoist heavenly abode, who had arrived first, as well as the cultivators he had interacted with, all came over to greet him. Their words were filled with enthusiasm. The various sects and clans had established themselves in the mountain and sea realm, and in the process of exterminating demons and devils, it was inevitable that disciples would be sacrificed. However, ever since the Pure Feather sect had given birth to the demonic dragon, the number of casualties had been greatly reduced. It was easy to imagine that in the future, when the sects and clans expanded their territory, they would need to borrow the Pure Feather sect's resources. Because of that, as the disciples of the Pure Feather sect walked along with their patriarch, they were constantly greeted by people. At that moment, Ding Xian and Yang Yanjun were also among the younger disciples of Clear Feather sect. Due to their master, Chenitong, they rarely interacted with the outside world. Since no one came up to talk to them, they were happy with the peace and quiet. Yang Yanjun looked towards the front. Although he cultivated under Clear Feather's tutelage, this was his first time seeing his own patriarch. However, he had been warned beforehand and knew how powerful the patriarch was, so he didn't dare to look too long. He only glanced briefly before lowering his head. It was at this point that Tao Jinhong suddenly stopped in place and exchanged greetings with a tall, slender woman. After exchanging a few words, they walked up to the spiritual platform. Yang Yanjun curiously looked at her a few times. He saw that although this woman's face was also extremely beautiful, her entire body was filled with a vigorous heroic spirit. However, at this time, he suddenly felt a piercing pain in his eyes, and tears unconsciously flowed from his eyes. Off to the side, Ding Xian giggled and said, "Little junior brother, I told you not to stare, but you didn't listen. Look at you, your eyes are swollen." Yang Yanjun rotated his energy, and his eyes shone with a bit of coolness. He had already recovered. In response to his elder sister's teasing, he smiled and said, "Elder sister, I didn't expect that the Taoist woman to be a Taoist paradise. Which sect leader is she?" A look of envy and yearning appeared on Ding Xian's face. "That's sect leader Lan of the Lishan sect," she said. "I've heard that she's only been in the Tao for 800 years. Among the Taoist paradises of the various sects, she's the only Taoist woman to sit in the position of sect leader." Yang Yanjun saw her expression and smiled. "Elder sister's talent is extraordinary. If you work hard, you might become a sect leader in the future." Ding Xian glared at him, but for some reason at this moment, a thought that she had never had before appeared in the depths of her heart. She clenched her fists uncontrollably. The people of the Clear Feather sect had already arrived at the spiritual platform in the outer hall. A Taoist came up to greet Tao Jinhong and said, "Sect leader Tao, please follow me." Tao Jinhong said to Yun Suan, "Sect leader Yun, I'll be going first." Yun Suan bowed and said, "Take care, sect leader Tao. We'll meet again in the hall." Tao Jinhong took the lead and stepped onto a Dharma pagoda spiritual peak. The disciples behind him hurriedly followed. When everyone was standing there, he used his magic power to communicate with the array pivot under his feet. The Dharma pagoda spiritual peak shook and soared into the thick clouds in the sky. After a short while, there was a rumble. The spiritual peak broke through the clouds and came to the sky. Yang Yanjun looked around and saw that there were hundreds of Dharma mountains floating in the surroundings. Some were near, and all of them were emitting spiritual light. Under the contrast of the void above them, they seemed to have merged with the 10,000 stars. The spiritual peak that the Clear Feather sect was on floated up slowly and steadily. Soon, it passed most of the sects and reached a very high place. There were only two that could stand side by side with it. They were the Pingdu sect and the Huanjin temple. The spiritual peak was ranked according to the cultivation of the cultivator in charge of the place. If one's mana was not enough, they would be ranked lower. While Yang Yanjin was watching, he heard Tao Jinhong's voice. This place is full of spiritual vigor, and it has been cleansed by the array restriction. It is the clearest. There are still a few days before the meeting. You can cultivate here. When he heard this, he knew that this was a rare opportunity. He greeted Ding Xian, sat up straight, and slowly guided the spiritual vigor into his body. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed. Suddenly, there was the sound of a bell, and he woke up from his meditation. He looked around and realized that there were a few more spiritual peaks around him. Moreover, there was a turbid air floating around two of them. He recognized that they were where the spiritual doors were, and he could not help but look expectant. He said, "I wonder if little sister is coming this time." He looked to the side and saw 6 spiritual peaks that were shining with red light. They were located slightly lower than where he was. The Qi dynamic was obviously the power of Qi and blood, which he was most familiar with. He immediately knew that the great mystic cultivators of the 6 countries had arrived. And outside of the many Dharma mountains, there was a mountain that stood alone. There was a thick demonic aura spreading from the blood and Qi. He understood that among the demon clan, only the ox-dragon clan of the 100 South Civ continent was qualified to enter this place. Seeing that there were so many mighty people here, he thought about how this meeting was to occupy the space outside the sky, and how he could participate in such a big event. He could not help but feel excited. After waiting for another half a day, there was another sound of the bell above the sky. In the eyes of the spiritual masters of the various sects, 6 spiritual peaks appeared one by one. On the spiritual peak in the northwest, there was a cloud that was as white as snow that floated over. It looked pure and untainted, and it melted into one place like a fine white jade. When everyone looked over, they saw that the surface of the cloud reflected all kinds of beautiful things in people's hearts, and also corresponded to various sexual thoughts. For a moment, people's hearts were shaken, and those who did not have enough willpower did not dare to look away. They quickly circulated their hearts to avoid embarrassing themselves in front of their peers. However, the junior disciples of the various sects were not aware of it. That was because the prohibition in the formation map had covered their eyes. Unlike their masters who could see the changes in the spiritual vigor inside, they were not affected at all. The cloud slowly descended and slowly gathered on the upper palace's altar. It was a Taoist with black hair and white clothes. It was the sect leader of the Yuan Shin sect, Shui Dingyuan. He sat cross-legged, and his figure was faintly discernible. It was as though he would not exist in the world if a gust of wind blew over. Pingdu sect's Lan Yanchu looked away and slowly exhaled. He calmed his mana and thought to himself, with the protection of the heaven-patching formation map, even if we look directly at the appearance of the spiritual bodies of the spiritual masters, we will not be hurt. Our minds will only be shaken, and we can use this to train. At that moment, there were many people who had the same thought as him. They were all thinking of using this visualization to train themselves and improve their cultivation. In a flash, starlight shone down from the spiritual peak in the west. Everyone's spirits were lifted, and they looked over. However, with one look, they felt as though the light pierced into their hearts, and it was slightly painful like needles. What was more terrifying was that the Qi dynamic did not seem to dissipate. Instead, it became stronger and stronger, as though if they let it go on, they would be cut into pieces. Everyone immediately understood that this was the Qi dynamic in their bodies being stimulated by the spiritual Qi within the sword. They quickly calmed their minds and suppressed it with all their might. After a long time, the sword light that was like a river of stars suddenly gathered together. Yu Xianxiao and Ying Chuanxiu appeared and sat down on their respective altars. After a while, the sound of surging water could be heard. Just by listening to the movement, it felt as though the entire mountain and sea realm was about to be overturned. Although they knew that this was not the case, it still caused many people's expressions to change. Some people with weaker willpower could not help but stand up. Everyone could vaguely guess what was going on. The spiritual masters did not appear at the same time, but one by one. It was clear that they were deliberately helping them, allowing them to take advantage of the gap to calm their chi dynamic. After realizing this, everyone who thought that their cultivation was strong enough let go of their previous restraints and used their hearts to sense the chi dynamic. After the sound of the water continued for a while, it stopped. Sect leader Qin and Mengjida appeared one after another, and their surging chi dynamic was also restrained. After all, this kind of opportunity was hard to come by. However, they knew that there was still one more person who had not arrived. There was still a chance, so they pulled themselves together and waited patiently. After 100 breaths of time, a chaotic and unpredictable profound energy suddenly descended from the northern sky, enveloping the entire formation. As soon as this chi appeared, everyone present had an illusion that there was a huge force constantly pressing down on them. Under this force, their spirit dharma bodies became extremely small, and as time passed, it seemed as though heaven and earth were gradually swallowed up by this chi. Only an inch of space remained. This feeling was so strong that they almost lost connection with their own magic power. However, after experiencing the previous 2 trials, most of them had the experience to deal with it, so they managed to survive. The cultivators of the 9 continents could still hold on, but Gongxian Zhao and the other great mystic cultivators of the 6 nations, as well as the great sage ox dragons, were in a difficult situation. They felt that their blood and chi were being pressed down by a vast whaley, as if they relaxed, their bodies would be crushed to pieces. Their previous method was useless, so they could only use their magic power to activate the protective restrictive formation, and only then were they able to hold on. Chapter 1454. The Xian Qi gathered and fell down like a tornado, landing on a Dharma Pagoda spirit peak. Once again, a 5-colored light flashed and the sky darkened. After a moment of confusion, when they looked again, they saw a handsome, black-robed Taoist sitting there. At this moment, the 6 Taoists of the mountain and sea realm had all arrived. The Taoists of the various sects, the Taoists of the heavenly caves, and the sect masters all stood up, clasped their hands, and said, "Greetings, venerable Taoists." Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "Fellow Taoists of the various sects, please sit down." Everyone bowed again, and then sat down again. At this time, Sect Master Qin asked a child beside him, "Have all the clans arrived?" The child opened a jade scroll in front of him, bowed, and said, "Reporting to Sect Master, the sects and tribes of the 4 territories, with the exception of the Lotus Heart Butterfly tribe, have all arrived." There was a reason why the Lotus Heart Butterfly tribe hadn't arrived this time. Demons and outsiders were different from human cultivators. Only those of the younger generation who hadn't mingled with the world could borrow magical boats to go beyond the heavens. If there were too few of them, it would be useless, but if there were too many, it would shake the foundation of the tribe. Furthermore, even if they reached the Great Dust Realm, if they stayed for too long, they would still be trapped in the realm. If they didn't break the shackles, they would never be able to return. As such, the people sent out were bound to be cut off from the main tribe. The Lotus Heart Butterfly tribe didn't have any intention of expanding. They believed that the mountain and sea realm was enough for their tribe to live in, so they had given notice in advance that they were willing to leave. However, not everyone thought that way. The Ox Dragon tribe was also very clear about their own shortcomings. They could rule over their own realm, but they were inherently weak when it came to exploring the heavens beyond. However, they believed that their own tribe had to participate. Otherwise, over time, they would be ostracized by the cultivators of the 9 continents and their allied alliances. Even if they had to sacrifice many of their tribe members, they wouldn't hesitate. There was no right or wrong here. It all depended on how the family chose. Sect leader Qin nodded slightly, and the boy bowed, then retreated. Sect leader Qin looked around at the various mountain peaks and slowly said, "For 10,000 years, the Taoist cultivators of the Junshin realm controlled the heavenly ghost tribe from afar. They gathered all sorts of medicinal herbs and precious materials from the mountain and sea realm. After the heavenly ghost tribe was destroyed, they tried to cross over to invade the mountain and sea realm. Because of that, I joined forces with several other true Taoists to wage war against the Junshin realm. Now, most of the almighty divine abilities of the Junshin realm have been wiped out. He waved his horsetail whisk, causing a huge sphere of spiritual light to spread out above everyone's heads. Soon, the great dust realm's all-heavens territory map was revealed to the various powers of the mountain and sea realm, although they clearly knew that their side had already conquered this domain. However, when the people of the various sects saw it for themselves, looking at the boundless, resplendent stars, many of them couldn't help but feel shocked. At the same time, they thought that it was fortunate that the Qinsong, the Shaoqing, and the other sects had been born during the mortal tribulation. If they were still trapped in the 9 continents, how could they be in such a good situation today? The mountain and sea realm was already rich with spiritual opportunity. Now that another realm was in the palm of their hands, it could be predicted that, as long as there were no unforeseen events in the future, it would at least be like the 9 continents, flourishing for tens of millions of years. At this time, Mengjin cupped his hands and bowed to sect leader Qin. He stood up from his seat and used his magic power to move the magic mountain. He slowly walked to the center of the field and said, "The great dust realm is different from the mountain and sea realm. There is no vast land in the realm, only countless earthly planets scattered throughout the vast void sky. For example, the major sects usually control one or several earthly planets. If there are 3 or more earthly planets close to each other, then that place can be called a heavenly domain." When Gongshi Zhao heard this, he had some doubts in his heart. He signaled to the Shu Hua nation's great mystic scholar, Yuan Zai. The latter understood and activated his qi and blood. The magic mountain under him shone brightly and slowly moved out from the crowd. This magic mountain relied on the cultivator's own qi activity to move it. If one's cultivation was insufficient and still wanted to forcibly control it, then it would only be a loss of face. However, being able to move it was enough to prove one's strength, and that he had the right to speak here. When he came to the front, he put his hands together and said, "Greetings, Supreme Meng." Mengjin said, "Does fellow Taoist Yuan have something to say?" Yuan Zai straightened his body and said loudly, "Yes. I have something I don't understand. Dare I ask Supreme Meng, there are so many heavenly domains in the great dust realm. Could it be that every earthly planet in this realm has spiritual opportunity?" Mengjin nodded and said, "So that's what fellow Taoist is talking about. I can help clear up your doubts. The great dust realm has flourished for hundreds of thousands of years. It has its own set of techniques that can cover the originally desolate earthly planet with spiritual opportunity and use it as one's own." Yuan Zai's eyes widened, and his voice became louder than before. He said, "I wonder if such a technique can be used in the mountain and sea realm?" When the crowd heard this, they couldn't help but start discussing. There were countless earthly planets above the mountain and sea realm's virtual sky. If they could do this, they could become the base of various sects in the future. It wasn't without benefits. At the very least, they wouldn't have to face endless demons, devils, and outsiders. Mengjin said, "Fellow Taoist Yuan, the birth of spiritual opportunity isn't something that can be done in a day. It's just like tearing down the east wall to repair the west wall. Most of the earthly planets in the great dust realm were patiently managed by many powerful cultivators, and after a long period of time, they evolved. With the help of a fellow Taoist, I've already retrieved this technique. If fellow Taoists are interested, you can take a look at it when you return." Yuan Zai was slightly disappointed in his heart. However, it was better than nothing. He thanked him and urged the mountain to slowly retreat. At this moment, he discovered that a large half of his vital qi and blood had actually been consumed in just this movement. He could not help but be speechless. It seemed that it was not easy to come out and speak. If he wanted to do this again in the future, he would have to think carefully before coming out. Mengjin waited for him to leave before saying, "There are many heaven regions hidden in Junshin world, so it is hard to count how many there are. There are around 400 strong heaven regions, and 90% of them are under the rule of Yuliangism and Qi Accumulation Palace. Most of the great mystiques we fought before came from these two families. As he spoke, hundreds of heavenly regions in the heavenly domain map shone with light, and they were divided into two camps based on the strength of the light. Everyone looked over, and couldn't help but be shocked by the two forces. This seemed to be the majority of the heavenly regions that they could see, and the more remote ones could almost be ignored. Many of the people present couldn't help but be shocked. It was hard to imagine that they had fought against such a powerful force, and that they had won in the end. Guochenghe sat alone on one of the mountain peaks, and when he heard that the two forces had been destroyed, he felt very conflicted. He had been trapped for more than 1,000 years, and his spirit had long since been worn out. He knew that the Junqian world had long since been targeted by the almighty true young expert. Although he was fine now, it had not been easy for him to escape. How could he dare to go back? Right now, he just wanted to peacefully cultivate in the mountain and sea realm and continue the Taoist teachings of Blessed Treasure Palace. Mengzhen continued, "Now that we have won this war, these heavenly regions will be under the control of the mountain and sea realm. Furthermore, the countless precious materials and earthly treasures will not be wasted." Everyone couldn't help but pay close attention. The various forces had returned to this place to share in the spoils of victory. However, they also knew that it would not be so easy. Sure enough, Mengzhen continued, however, although the almighty experts of the Junqian world are no longer here, the remaining people still occupy the various heavenly regions. If the mountain and sea realm wants to stand on top, we must find a way to subdue them. Therefore, I have invited all of you here to gather the power of all of us to completely pacify this world. At this point, he paused for a moment. In a moment, each of the sects and clans should request for a heavenly region or earthly planet to stand guard over. If you can occupy it, you will be able to rule it in the future. However, I must say that the Taoists of the Junqian world are not to be trifled with. I hope that everyone will act according to their abilities. With that, he cupped his hands and bowed, then slowly retreated. Everyone's eyes shone with anticipation. The next step would be to allocate the heavenly regions. However, they all knew that before the great sects had made their decision, it would not be their turn yet. The magical peak where sect leader Qin was at slowly rose. Soon he reached the highest point. Under everyone's gaze, he waved his horsetail whisk, and a wave of water swept across the sky. It swept the area under the control of the Qi Accumulation Palace, and he said, "My Qinsong school can stand guard here." Yu Xianshao flicked his finger, and a sword light sliced through the area where the Qi Accumulation Palace used to be. "My Shaoqing sect will take this place." Xue Dingyuan, who was sitting on the other side, did not make any moves, but clouds and mist appeared, covering a part of the heavenly regions, and he said, "This will be the place where the 6 sects of the Spirit Gate will stay." With this, the 3 sects took almost 30% of the heavenly regions of the Junqian world, and they were all the best places. The sects had no objections to this. These places were taken by the 3 sects, so they should be arranged like this. Taking a step back, even if they took all of it, they had nothing to say. Moreover, the larger the region, the more Taoists of the Junqian world there would be. Even if they gave it to them, they would not be able to hold it. Sect Master Qin turned to look at where the 6 countries of the Eastern Wastelands were, and said clearly, "Why don't the Taoists of the Eastern Wastelands choose a place?" Gong Xuanzhao put his hands together and bowed. He looked at it carefully for a moment, and then discussed with the great mystic cultivators of the other 5 countries for a while. The 6 of them worked together and opened their hands. A patch of blood spread out, covering a dozen of the heavenly regions on the map, and then it was hard to continue. He had a thought. There must be a reason why the 9 provinces arranged the map like this. This might be the limit that the 100 countries of the Eastern Wastelands could reach, so he decisively stopped and said, "Everyone, my 100 countries of the Eastern Wastelands have chosen." After he retreated, Huanzhen, Pingdu, Mount Li, Qingyu, Yaoyin, Prinyuan, and other sects that had people from the Grotto Heaven in charge started to move. Some scattered and small sects did not dare to choose, and all of them were prepared to rely on the big sections. Of course, not all sects were willing to send their disciples to the Junshin world, and many of them gave up voluntarily. About a day later, all the forces had chosen their territories, but even so, there were still more than half of the heavenly regions left on the map. However, there were many Taoists in the Junshin world, and they were many times more than the cultivators of the 9 provinces. Even if they pulled in the 100 countries of the eastern wastelands, they would not be able to swallow the Junshin world in one go. When they reached that place, they would have to slowly weaken the power of the Junshin world, and this process might last for hundreds or thousands of years, or even longer. Chapter 1455. The forces of the 9 continents spent another 2 days to adjust and discuss. Finally, they decided on the regions that they would suppress. As for the date of the expedition, it would depend on the specific preparations. After the discussion, the people from the various forces dispersed. However, most of them did not leave the heaven patching formation diagram. Instead, they stayed in various temples, preparing to continue discussing the follow-up matters with their allies. Just now, they only discussed the general matters. There were still many problems that needed to be resolved. For example, how many disciples should be sent over, who should be the leader, how to contact them when they arrived, etc. Luckily, there was enough time so they could slowly discuss. At this time, in the sky, the 6 highest mountains were still floating there. Zhang Yan, sect leader Qin, and the others had not left. They also had many things to discuss. One of them was especially important. It had to be prepared early. Whether the forces could stand firm in their own territories would depend on this move. Sect leader Qin looked at everyone and said, Hall Master Duzhen suggested that after the disciples of the various sects go over, there is no need to rush to expand. We can first build formations in the various heavens and advance step by step. What do you all think? The Junshin realm relied on the formation path to travel to and fro. Before the 6 of them returned, they had already ordered Sima Quan to guard all the formation paths so that the cultivators of the Junshin realm could not link up with each other. When they went over again, they could attack along the formation paths. This way, it was easy to advance and retreat. There was one more thing. Although there were many cultivators in this world, this was only in all the heavens. When it came to each planet, they might not be that strong. In fact, because their legacies were slightly weaker, they might not be weaker than the cultivators of the 9 continents at the same cultivation realm. And if they always had the formation in their hands, they could ensure that if they encountered a heavens that resisted fiercely, those with profound cultivation could rush over in the shortest time possible. Ing Chuanqiu said, Does Sage Zhang mean to repair the original 6 formations? Zhang Yan said, Even if we repair the original formations, there are only 6. It might be enough for the cultivators of the Junshin world, but for the cultivators of the 9 continents, it is still not enough. Ing Chuanqiu said, How many do you think we need, Sage Zhang? Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, Naturally, the more the better. If possible, I should build on every heavenly domain that I occupy. Ing Chuanqiu pondered for a moment and shook his head. This is an extremely difficult task. Let's not talk about external objects. It's hard to estimate the time needed. In order to cultivate the array Dao, it was impossible to spread it out all at once. Moreover, during the construction, in order to prevent external enemies from destroying it, it was necessary to send people to guard it, which restrained a part of the power of the 9 continents. Furthermore, building it would require vast quantities of precious materials, and before any harvest could be harvested, they would have to rely on the mountain and sea realm. That would be a huge burden. If he didn't want this matter to become a burden, he could only build 2 or 3 at the same time. Zhang Yan said, At least within 100 years, I need to create another 20 formations. Just now is enough for me to use. Otherwise, it will affect the overall situation. He didn't say this number casually. Among the many heavenly domains in the Junshin realm, there were nearly 20 that happened to be at the juncture of the 9 continents. These territories had to be controlled, and in addition to the original 6, it should be enough to stabilize the situation. When the crowd heard this, They looked at the map again and understood what he meant. Xue Dingyuan said, I agree with Sage Zhang. If the 9 continents go to occupy the Junqian realm, we will face the counterattack of the cultivators here. With these formations, not only will it be convenient to travel, but it will also be easy to keep the territories that we occupy. Sect leader Qin turned his gaze and asked, Sect leader Yu, do you have a different opinion? Yu Xianxiao was very sure of this and said, I think it's feasible. As for the precious materials, after we occupy a few heavenly domains, will there be a lack of them? Sect leader Qin nodded and said, the territories that we occupy are rich in spiritual opportunity, and there are countless external medicines and precious materials. Although Hall Master Du Zhen's plan is wasteful, it is prudent, and the harvest in the future will not be small. Jide, you will be in charge of this matter. The precious materials needed to build the formations must be gathered as soon as possible. Meng Zhen said, I will take care of it, and do my best to prepare all these before we depart. At this moment, Xue Dingyuan asked, Sage Zhang, Sage Sima has made a great contribution this time. Did he say that he wants to return to the mountain to cultivate? Zhang Yan said, Sage Sima once told me that he is very willing to stay in the Junqian realm. But if the 9 continents send cultivators there, this realm will not be stable, so I think it is better for him to stay there. Sima Quan was a heavenly demon, and now that the monarchs of the Junqian realm had been wiped out, there was no one in this realm who could control him. Letting him stay there would be beneficial for the sects of the 9 continents to invade the other heavenly domains. Xue Dingyuan nodded and didn't ask any more. Sect Master Qin said, Hall Master Du Zhen, how are Rao and Bei? Zhang Yan said, ever since the 2 of them entered the side courtyard of Mount Xiaoye, they have been cultivating peacefully inside and have never come out. When I came out, I left a clone there. If Sect Master wants to see them, I can call them over. Sect Master Qin nodded. It is time to let the 2 of them come over to sign a contract with me. Zhang Yan said yes, and immediately used his divine will to inform the 2 of them, saying that the lords were really waiting here, and invited the 2 of them over for the appointment. These days, Rao Jifeng and Bei Xiangtong had gradually realized that the 9 continents invited them here, but it seemed like they had not decided how to deal with them. Bei Xiangtong had never been worried. He understood that the cultivators of the 9 continents still needed him to deal with the 2 Gong brothers, so they wouldn't do anything to him. The worst result would be a few decades of house arrest, and the possibility of this was very small. Since there was no danger to their lives, the only thing they could do was to cultivate wholeheartedly. Rao Jifeng was different from him. He didn't think too much. Since he had already made a decision, and he didn't have the ability to fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents, there was no point in thinking too much. It was better to cultivate patiently and slowly wait for the result. When he was in Junqian realm, other than a period of peaceful time in Qi Accumulation Palace, he was constantly on the run. Even when he cultivated, he had to be on guard against external enemies at all times. But here, there were no external disturbances, so his cultivation was even more refined. While the 2 of them were meditating, they suddenly felt an external divine will descend. They knew that the truth of the 9 continents was calling them. After a short while, they both came out of their meditative state and followed the qi to the direction of the heaven-mending formation pavilion. They hurried and hurried. After a month, they finally arrived at the boundary. On the formation map, the formation door opened, and a boy with a talisman came out to lead the 2 of them in. After passing through a few formation doors, they arrived at the place where the Dharma peak was. When Rao and Bei saw that Zhang Yan and the other 5 were here, they immediately came forward to greet them. The 6 of them also politely returned the greeting. After all, the 2 of them were once monarchs, and they might need to be of use in the future, so it was necessary to give them the necessary respect. Sect Master Qin said, We've been busy dealing with mundane affairs these days, so we've neglected the 2 of you. Rao Jifeng said, Sect Master Qin, you're too kind. The 2 of us just want a proper place to cultivate. The mountain and sea realm has no disasters or disturbances, so it's a blessed land. The Junqian realm doesn't have such peaceful days. Sect Master Qin nodded slightly, and with a sweep of his horsetail whisk, a spell contract floated down. He said, "The 9 continents will make an agreement with the 2 of you, fellow Taoists. Please take a look first." Bei Xiangtong took a step forward, took the contract, and read it carefully. His expression didn't change, and then he passed it to Rao Jifeng. The latter took it, and when he looked at it, he saw that there weren't any particularly harsh conditions. Although after signing the contract, he would have to obey the orders of the 6 people in front of him, which was a level lower in terms of status, the 9 continents were powerful now, so he had no choice but to lower his head. Moreover, if he didn't sign the contract, his fate would be worrying. After reading it, the 2 of them communicated for a while, and then said, "Dear lords, we're willing to sign this contract." After saying that, the 2 of them didn't hesitate too much, and signed the spell contract in front of the 6 people. Sect Master Qin waved his horsetail whisk, and took back the contract. Once the contract was signed, the 2 of them could order them around without worrying about any accidents. He said slowly, "Now that there are no monarchs in Junqian world, if there are external enemies, it might be hard to defend against them. Therefore, I need the 2 of you to go back and guard this world." The 2 of them were a little surprised. They didn't expect the cultivators of the 9 continents to actually let them go. Now that the spell contract was signed, it shouldn't be a test. Bei Xiangtong thought for a while and said, "May I know what do the dear lords need us to do?" Xue Dingyuan said, "The cultivators of the 9 continents will be sending disciples to Duotian domain in a few days. I hope the 2 of you can take care of them." The 2 of them came to a realization, but they didn't think much about it. Bei Xiangtong wasn't a person of Junqian world. And Rao Jifeng, as a cultivator of the demonic sect, was a target to be banished from the 9 continents, and now they were on the same side as the 9 continents, so this was more beneficial to them. The 2 of them said, "So we're working for the dear lords." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This matter isn't urgent, you can leave whenever you think it's convenient." Rao Jifeng and Bei Xiangtong bowed together. Yu Xianshao said, "I heard that Taoist Bei is a cultivator of the smoke wave realm. How much do you know about that almighty being?" Bei Xiangtong sighed and said, "Before the incident in the smoke wave realm, I was already cultivating in Junqian world, so I really don't know much about that person. Moreover, such an almighty being isn't someone I can speculate about." The true lords asked a few more questions, and seeing that the 2 of them really didn't know anything, they stopped. Seeing that, the 2 of them bid farewell and left. Sect Master Qin pondered, and said, "We still need to pay attention to that almighty being. Improving our cultivation is the most important thing, but he's in an empty world, so we need to search for him as soon as possible. A few days ago, I had a discussion with Clan Master Yunzhu, and she has already sent a few clansmen back to Jiaohua world." Zhang Yan was surprised and said, "Since they can return to this world, does that mean that there are still clansmen of Clan Master Yun who survived in this world?" Sect Master Qin said, "This is also a fortunate thing. I have already asked them to bring the Twin Realm Dial and Sky Dial. If everything goes smoothly, there should be accurate news coming back soon." Chapter 1456. While the mountain and sea realm was methodically making all sorts of preparations to seize Junqian, on the other side, a huge cloud whale was traversing through the void essence sea. This creature's bloodline originated from a void variant of unknown origin. As soon as it reached adulthood, it was born with the ability to traverse the void. This creature was called Yunjiang, and he was already more than 1,000 years old. He was one of the youngest members of the tribe. However, in addition to being a member of the Cloud tribe, he also had another important identity. He was Wei Zihong's disciple in name, and he had studied techniques and divine abilities under the Jade Moon sect. If not for that, sect leader Qin would not have been at ease to let him come out alone. The Cloud Whale tribe did not have any cultivation techniques, and when they were around 1,000 years old, they were almost at the level of demon great saints. However, they did not have much combat ability. When facing ordinary demons, they could rely on their huge bodies to win, but when facing creatures with magical techniques and divine abilities, they were powerless. Yun Jiang, however, was different. He had a unique talent, and when he was 800 years old, he was able to take human form. After that, He became a disciple of the Jade Moon sect and cultivated his strength to the fourth revolution. No one in the same generation could compare to him, and when he used his magical treasures, even some of the elders could not do anything to him. This time, there was no one more suitable than him to search the Hornflower realm. After traveling for 6 years, Yun Jiang felt the pull from his bloodline grow stronger, and he knew that he was about to reach the Earth realm. In the past, the Cloud Whale tribe had to travel through the Void Essence Sea for tens of thousands of years because they did not know which Void realm could accommodate them, so they could only drift about. This time, it would not take them so long to return to their homeland. He pulled himself together. He had made it through such a long journey, and he could not afford to make any mistakes during the last part of the journey. Another period of time passed, and he finally arrived at the Hornflower realm before the Heaven and Earth gate closed. However, just as he was about to enter the realm, something unexpected happened. The originally clear feeling in his heart suddenly disappeared, and it was so sudden that there had been no warning. Yun Jiang was startled. The bloodline connection had been severed. Perhaps that member of his tribe had encountered some danger. Originally, his plan was very good. He wanted to quickly find that fellow clansman and try to understand what the situation was like in the lower realm. Then, he would send useful information over as soon as possible. But now, he was in a difficult situation. If that clansman wasn't here, then he would have to do it himself. Right now, he could be considered an outsider. Even if he was willing to do it, he had to consider all sorts of unforeseen circumstances. Should they retreat or advance? In fact, even if he didn't enter this world, he only needed to throw the Tong Tiangae or the Two Realms instrument into it, and it would be considered as a trip to this world. However, these two magical artifacts couldn't speak, so they could only slowly wait for the natives of the lower realm to discover them. This was something that relied heavily on one's luck. If they were unlucky and ended up in a remote place, it would be common for them to remain silent for thousands to tens of thousands of years. My Cloudy Cloud tribe doesn't have a very high position in the mountain and sea realm. Now that we have a lot of teleportation spell formation altars, they're relying less and less on me. If I fail this time, I'm afraid they'll be even more disappointed in me. While practicing cultivation in Jade Academy, he had inevitably been influenced by his fellow clan members. He knew that if the Cloudy Cloud tribe didn't display its full worth, then its position would drop dramatically. In times of peace, it wouldn't matter much, but in times of crisis, it was possible that no one would care about the Cloudy Cloud tribe. Although that might not necessarily happen, he had to be prepared for danger in times of peace. As long as he displayed his importance, he wouldn't have to worry about any of that. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he decided to enter the lower realm. His enormous frame flickered to the side as he peeled off the Cloudy Cloud robe, which he then swallowed. Then he shot toward the Heaven and Earth door. In the blink of an eye, he felt a tremor run through him, and a feeling of dizziness washed over him. When he came to his senses, he found himself hovering in the sky, surrounded by layers upon layers of clouds that churned endlessly. After a moment of observation, he realized that this was the white cloud sea that Yunju had told him about, which meant that he was in the vicinity of the base Skull Mountain. The Hornflower realm was similar to the mountain and sea realm in that it had a round sky and a square earth. However, the land here wasn't boundless. Instead, there was an end in every direction, and beyond that was the boundless void. The base Skull Mountain was to the west of the land, and he could sense that no one was nearby. Clearly, no one had noticed him entering the lower realm. The Cloud Whale's ability to pass through the void was an innate divine ability, and when it broke through the Heaven and Earth door, it caused a huge commotion. If it weren't for the fact that several tribes had entered the mountain and sea realm at the same time and had landed near frigid Jade Sea Prefecture, the Mieming tribe wouldn't have noticed. His body flickered, and in the blink of an eye, he transformed into a tall, valiant young man with long, flowing hair. Compared to his previous enormous form, he preferred to act in his human form. First of all, he didn't attract too much attention. According to Yunju, the stronger the demons in the Hornflower realm were, the larger their bodies would be. Generally speaking, the native creatures of the lower realm relied on this method to determine the threat of their opponents. Second of all, it was more convenient to practice cultivation as a human, and it was easier to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. He didn't wear his eye-catching Taoist robe. Instead, he was bare-chested as he leaped down into the sea of clouds, almost as if he were diving into water. It wasn't that he didn't want to use his magic, but that the spiritual energy here was far inferior to that of the mountain and sea realm. If he used up too much, it would take a long time to recover, and if something dangerous happened, it would be very difficult to deal with. Half a month later, he emerged from the sea of clouds, and was finally able to see what the lower realm looked like. Beneath the clear blue sky was a vast expanse of land, which was gray in color. Mountains and valleys rose and fell, rivers crisscrossed, and many of the higher places were covered with snow and ice. Based on his experience with the Yaoyin clan, it wasn't difficult for him to determine that the spiritual energy here was sparse, not acquired, but innate. In fact, if you compared it to the mountain and sea realm, it would be considered a barren wasteland. He shifted his gaze and locked onto a large river, following it downstream. No living creature would stray too far from a water source. Even the Lu and Lu were no exception. Although the almighty ones who cultivated divine abilities didn't need to eat or drink, most of the Lu and Lu clansmen couldn't live without it. Along the way, he would directly fly over any dangerous place he encountered. However, after 100 days, he had found no less than 1,000 suitable places to stay. Other than some strange monsters and ferocious birds that wandered the wasteland, he didn't even encounter a single settlement. He couldn't help but feel slightly puzzled. According to Yunzhu, the Lu and Lu clansmen were enormous, and when they fought with the Cloud Whale, they occupied almost all of the Horned Flower realm. But now, they seemed to have disappeared without a trace. It's been so long, he thought. Perhaps the lower realm has changed a lot. Continuing to search like this won't do. I'll have to use the talisman. He opened his mouth and spat out a white light. Then a dozen or so talismans flew out of his mouth. The Cloud Whale's stomach was born with the ability to store everything, just like the Chengkuan sack. This talisman was a soul-seeking talisman made by the cultivators of Guangyuan sect. He plucked it off and tossed it out, letting it fly in different directions. He found a mountain and landed. He placed an incense burner in front of him and then sat down to regulate his breathing to recover the mana he had used up these days. A day later, a ray of white light flew over from afar and finally came to the top of his head. It rotated in the air and gave off a rustling sound. Yun Zhang's spirit was lifted. He caught the talisman and looked at it. His eyes lit up as he looked in a direction and said, "It's the west." After thinking for a while, he took out a few chi-replenishing pills and swallowed them. Then he leaped and traveled close to the ground. 5 days passed quickly. He saw a stronghold built with wood and stone in the distance. It was about 10 acres and built on a slope. It was very crude and could barely block the wind and rain. However, what surprised him the most was that all the creatures he saw inside were actually of the human race. He was born in the mountain and sea realm. Everything he knew about Jiaohua came from Yunzhu. He had heard that this place had long been devoid of humans. He had never thought that he would see it as soon as he returned. There were about 100 people in the stronghold. Whether they were men or women, young or old, they were all emaciated and sallow. Their clothes barely covered their bodies. When they saw him flying over, expressions of fear appeared on their faces. However, they did not flee in panic. An old man with a long beard walked out with the help of others. He shouted for everyone to kneel down and kowtow. Yun Zhang's eyes lit up. From the reactions of these people, he could tell that they had seen people like him who could fly through the air before. He arrived in front of the stronghold and slowly descended. He took out a heart-piercing jade mirror and turned it around to face the old man. He performed an incantation gesture, which caused a flash of light to appear. He understood what they were talking about. He put the mirror away and said, "This is the wilderness. Why do you all live here?" The old man replied, "Your Excellency, our Jian clan was originally a large clan in the Source Reach Manor. However, we committed a crime, and as a result, we were exiled to this place." Yun Jiang asked, and only then did he finally find out that for some reason, The current Hornflower realm was already occupied by the human race, and it was incomparably prosperous. However, most of them were gathered in the eastern continent, and he came from the extreme west, so he didn't bump into them. He thought for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever seen an ape-like demon that is about the size of a human, has little fur, has a tail, and can speak?" The old man thought for a moment, then shook his head with a bitter smile. "Please forgive this old man's ignorance, but I have never heard of such a demon." Yun Jiang frowned. He was very curious. Logically speaking, with Lu and Lu's strength, they should not have disappeared without a trace. What exactly had happened? He looked into the distance. There was a large city with a population of 1,010,000 kilometers to the east. Perhaps he would be able to find out. He casually threw a bottle of pills on the ground and flew into the sky. The people in the stronghold all heaved a sigh of relief when they saw him leave. A middle-aged man came forward to help the old man up and asked, "Father, where did that person come from?" The old man pondered and said, "That person can fly in the air with his corporeal body, so he must have cultivated to the heaven's step barrier. Seeing how he speaks in the air without any difficulty, maybe he is not far from the connecting star barrier." The middle-aged man was shocked. The star-receiving barrier? I don't think there is such a person in the 10 prefectures. If there is, it would be in Heaven Descent City. The old man narrowed his eyes. This Excellency's identity is definitely not simple. Keep that pill bottle well and don't lose it. It might be useful in the future. Chapter 1457. It had been 3 months since Yun Jiang arrived at the Jiaohua boundary, and he had a basic understanding of the place. The place he was standing on was called the Tongyuan Prefecture, and more than 70% of the million people were gathered in this prefecture city. The prefecture occupied a radius of 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers, which was quite large. There were 10 large cities surrounding the mountains, rivers, and rivers. They were originally a country, but they were destroyed by the In Kingdom's army 20 years ago. Thus, they were added to the country's territory, and they were now known as the 10 prefectures. The Han dynasty had been established for 30 years, and the founding emperor was still alive, so it was at its peak. The dynasty's territory was also extremely vast, stretching to the upper reaches of the Hong River in the west, the scorched lands of the Crimson Ridge in the east, the Wulin Shanhai in the north, and the Dingyao Pass in the south. There were a total of 69 prefectures and 300 upper provinces. Unlike what he had imagined, cultivators could be seen everywhere, but most of them were not even as strong as the most ordinary strongmen. Only their punches and kicks could shatter stones, and they were still mortals, so they could not compare to cultivators who had opened their meridians. He used a few pills to exchange for a few books, and only then did he gain a little understanding of the way of cultivation here. Generally speaking, it was divided into the heaven, earth, and mortal meridians, and there was a huge difference between each level. Among them, mortal meridians were the lowest, and they usually absorbed the blood essence of demonic beasts to achieve the goal of transforming into a mortal body. The book in his hand recorded a very basic blood exchange method. If one could pass this test, they would enter the so-called blood fusion test. Once they entered this stage, they would be able to regrow severed limbs, and it would be difficult to be injured by knives and axes. At the same time, it meant that they would have unlimited possibilities in the future. It was impossible to use this method without a strong body, and the demonic blood was also very particular. The stronger the demonic beast, the more dangerous it was, but at the same time, the greater its future potential. This actually required many secret medicines, but most of them were in the hands of the royal family of the large clans, and the outside world had no way of knowing. Fortunately, the people of this world had boundless wisdom. By diluting the demonic blood and mixing it with crude medicinal liquids, ordinary people were able to endure it. However, it was still a shortcut. Once it was used, it would completely cut off the path of improvement. Even so, it was still better than being an ordinary person. Most of the people he saw along the way were like this. The prefecture called them wanderers. Almost all the slightly larger clans would provide for such people to ensure the stability of their own clans. As for the great divine ability that could fly in the sky, burrow into the earth, burn mountains and boil seas, he had never seen a single one of them. He thought about how this place was at the edge of the land. If he went any further, it would be the wilderness and glaciers where he came from. There were few plants and no signs of human habitation. Those who were slightly more capable would have gone to the capital city. This situation was normal. He thought, perhaps it's time to leave this place. I heard that there are sect-like institutions in Linchuan that teach cultivation methods. I should go there, but before that, I need to notify the inner realm. He opened his mouth and spat out dozens of array flags, instantly setting up a security array in the surroundings. Then he released the two-realm dial as well. In order to not attract attention, he used a medicinal powder as the price to stay in an old mansion. There were no great divine ability cultivators in Tongyuan City, but this was not without its benefits. At least, no one would notice the unusual movements here. He raised his hand and pressed on the dial. Immediately, a ray of light shone out. A moment later, a long-bearded Taoist was seen standing there. He bowed and said, "Yun Jiang of Yao Yin sect greets Meng Shangzhen." Meng Zhen said, "Spiritual Master Yun, have you safely arrived at Jiaohua boundary?" Yun Jiang said, "Yes, this trip was smooth, but the situation at Jiaohua boundary is very different from what Clan Master had told us." Meng Zhen's expression turned serious. He said, "Spiritual Master, please explain in detail." Yun Jiang acknowledged and roughly explained the situation. He said, "I feel that Jiaohua boundary may look simple on the surface, but there seems to be something hidden underneath. We need to explore elsewhere." Xinren Meng thought about it and agreed. "Xinren Yun, you can decide how to act on your own, but you have to pay attention to your own safety. Your clansmen disappeared mysteriously, and there might be someone in this realm who can threaten you." Yun Jiang said, "I will remember." Because the mana that was poured into the two-realm dial was limited, and the spiritual opportunity in this world was insufficient, he ended the conversation after a few more sentences. He kept the instrument and set up a qi-gathering formation before sitting down to cultivate. The night passed and dawn broke. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. He got off the bed and opened the door to see a woman in her 30s standing outside. She had a pretty face and fair skin. Her hair was combed into a high bun and she wore a beaded hoop. Two maidservants stood on her left and right, and behind them was a young man of 16 or 17. However, he looked dispirited and did not have the vigor that someone of his age should have. When the woman saw him coming out, she curtsied and said in a soft voice, "Mister, please come in." Yun Jiang recognized the wife of the owner of this house. He nodded slightly and said, "Madame Han, is there anything I can help you with?" Madame Han said, "If I may be so bold, I have something to discuss with Mr." Before Yun Jiang could speak, she added, "Mister, this may be beneficial to both of us." Yun Jiang did not refuse. He turned sideways and said, "Come in and talk." When they entered the house, the woman looked around and said apologetically, "This place is simple and crude, sorry to have delayed Mr. When I return, I will tell my husband to change a better room for Mr." Yun Jiang sat on the main seat and invited her to sit down. He said, "Madame Han, you can speak now." Madame Han glanced at him and asked carefully, "Mr. Yun is from another country?" Yun Jiang admitted frankly, "That's right. I used to travel in the wilderness and only recently came to Tongyuan City." Madame Han's beautiful eyes rippled. She said, "Mister, you must be very capable to be able to travel in the wilderness. I heard that in Tongyuan City, only a few of the generals have such ability." Yun Jiang thought for a moment and realized that the reason why she knew he was not ordinary was because of the medicinal powder. Although the powder was very ordinary to him, it was refined from the plants of the mountain and sea realm. It was exquisite and full of medicinal power. It was undoubtedly a priceless treasure here. Madame Han asked carefully, "Mister, you have asked someone in the government house to buy a geographical map and also the area around Linchuan City. Are you going to the government house?" Yun Jiang said, "Is there something wrong?" Madame Han was observant and could tell that he did not like to beat around the bush. She lowered her eyes and thought for a moment before looking up again. She said, there is nothing wrong. It's just that I have a presumptuous request. If possible, can you escort my nephew to Linchuan City? She pulled the young Lang Jun over as she spoke. Yun Jiang wanted to refuse, but when he looked at the young man again, he had an idea. He said, I'm used to traveling alone, I'm afraid. Madame Han did not give up. She said, Mister, I think you don't know that if you want to travel around in the Yin Kingdom, you need to get a warrant from a prominent family and report it to the state government. The imperial court is especially strict about this. If you are found to have no warrant, the guards will immediately come to arrest you. I am not threatening you. You can find out about this matter by asking around. If Mr. is willing to escort Xiaowu there, I can persuade my husband to be your warrant. Yun Jiang looked like he was considering it. Madame Han held a handkerchief in her hand and looked at him nervously. After a while, he agreed. All right, I don't want to cause any trouble. I will help Madame Han this time. Madame Han was overjoyed. She pushed the young Lang Jun and said, Xiaowu, quickly thank you. The young man was very polite. He came up and bowed. Thank you, mister. Yun Jiang nodded at him and turned around. Madame Han, since we are going together, I have something to say to him. Madame Han stood up immediately. Of course. She told the young man, Xiaowu, the family has entrusted you to Mr. You must follow his rules. Do you understand? She then turned around and said, I will take my leave. She curtsied and left with her maidservant. After they left, Yun Jiang looked at Xiaowu for a moment and said, You look like you haven't completed the blood fusion? Xiaowu was at a loss. Mister, why are you? Yun Jiang said, It seems that I was right. The grade of the blood you fused with is too high. Although your body looks strong, it is congenitally deficient. That is why you haven't passed this hurdle. You look fine now, but you are only supported by the precious medicine. You must have consumed the qi replenishing powder that I gave to the Han family. No wonder Madame Han handed you over to me. She must want me to help you remove the hidden danger. Xiaowu was stunned. He knelt down and kowtowed. Then he stood up and said, Please forgive me, mister. Xiaowu didn't know about this before. I will explain it to Auntie. Yun Jiang stopped him. Don't you care about your own life? Xiaowu looked sad. I have failed the blood fusion. I am afraid that I can only be a wanderer in the future. I have let down the family's expectations. Even if I can save my life, I will not be able to take back what I have lost. What is the point of living? Yun Jiang smiled. You are so young, but you have so many thoughts. Who said that there is no way to save the blood fusion? Others may not be able to do it, but it is not difficult for me. Xiaowu suddenly looked up and asked excitedly, Mister can help me? Yun Jiang nodded. Yes, but there is a condition. You must become my disciple and do something for me. Don't worry, I will not ask you to do anything that will harm the family. Instead, I will give you more benefits. Xiaowu immediately knelt down. Greetings, master. Yun Jiang praised him and called him up again. With a serious expression, she said, Since you are my disciple, I will help you solve this problem. Not only will I help you recover, but I will also help you enter the blood fusion gate. But you must remember, do not tell anyone about this. Otherwise, you and the family behind you will not be able to survive. Xiaowu was shocked. Yes, Xiaowu will remember. Yun Jiang was very satisfied. What do you need to do in Lintheng? Xiaowu answered, Auntie wants me to enter the Lu Dan Academy to see if I can learn some basic martial arts. But since I have a master, I will not go. Yun Jiang's expression brightened. I will go. Why not? He took Xiaowu as a disciple because he had the idea of sending him to the academy. Since the Han family had planned to do so, it was even better. If he wanted to understand this space, the simplest way was to start from the cultivation method. That place contained the cultivator's understanding of the world, and if he could obtain the complete method as long as he passed it back to the few true ones to take a look, he might be able to see the true background of the current Hornflower realm. Chapter 1458. Within the Shenyuan small world, Zhang Yan stood in front of a huge mountain that looked like a screen. Below him was a fire vent, According to his will, the place was shaped like a furnace made of earth and stone. The dragon heart was hovering above the flames, and it had already returned to its original size of 1,000 feet. There was a huge hole in the sky, and turbulent streams of air were pouring down from it, constantly washing away the smoke and turbid air that had risen up from below. As spiritual vigor poured in, the dragon heart started to beat slowly. One could hear the sound of blood surging as if it was alive. Although the treasure embryo was maintained by the Taoist who guarded the cave, it was still contaminated with some external air, which was not beneficial for future refinement. What he wanted to do now was to wash away the impurities and reach a clean and untainted state. It had been 7 years since the item was placed here. After his method, it finally got rid of the excess in the past and regained its vitality. Even the heartbeat was stronger and calmer than before. After a few more days, the heartbeat became more and more urgent. The thumping sound was like the beating of a drum, shaking the valley. Even the rising flames seemed to be higher. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. He knew that he was about to succeed. The more he got to this point, the more crucial it was. If something went wrong, it wouldn't be a waste of all his previous efforts, but it wouldn't be easy to achieve such perfection. Luckily, he had observed the 4 refinement tablets and figured out all the steps clearly. Moreover, he was in the small world, so he would notice immediately if there were any abnormalities, so he wasn't afraid of any accidents. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. There were no more sounds and the dragon heart seemed to have calmed down. It wasn't that it stopped beating, but from then on, it would rise and fall for years. Hence, he couldn't feel any movement in the short term. Zhang Yan nodded. At this point, the treasure embryo could be considered to have been refined thoroughly and he could move on to the next step. He wasn't in a hurry to refine this treasure. He could leave it here to nourish for a few more days so that it would be more compatible with this world. He turned around and walked a few steps before sitting down on a jade couch and starting to cultivate. As for how to enter the second stage, he had read through many secret manuals. Among them were the inheritance from the Qinsong school and the secret manuals from the Junchen realm. He already had a plan in his heart. As long as he accumulated enough cultivation, he could try to sever his past body. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly felt something. He opened his eyes and saw Child of Mountain River appearing in front of him. He asked, "Is there something wrong?" The Mountain River boy bowed and said, "Master, Mengzhen sent someone to report that Taoist Master Wei's disciple has already arrived at the Hornflower realm. Everything is still stable." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Did Mengzhen say anything about the situation in that realm?" The Mountain River boy said, "He did say a little." He waved his hand and a jade scroll flew out of thin air. He bowed and handed it forward. "I have already roughly recorded it." Zhang Yan used his mind and the jade scroll turned into specks of spirit light and flew into the space between his eyebrows. After a while, he had an idea of what was going on. The level of a realm could be roughly seen from the rise and fall of spirit vigor. The Hornflower realm's spirit vigor was declining. Based on the cultivators of this realm, it would be very difficult to reach the same level as the mountain and sea realm. However, the mysterious disappearance of Lu Lu might not be that simple. Fortunately, although Wei Zihong's disciple in name only had the cultivation of Yuanying, his true body was a cloud whale. Even if he encountered danger, he could escape through the void. Back then, dozens of cloud whale tribes also used this method to escape. As long as he acted cautiously, this method should be enough to deal with it. He just needed to wait patiently for the results. He thought for a while and said, "Tell the people outside to pay attention to this matter. If there is any news, report to me quickly." Mountain River Child said, "I accept your orders." He bowed and left. Hornflower Realm, Lin Chuandu, Lu Dan Academy. In a courtyard of the academy, Xiao Wu was trying out a set of 3 secret techniques that he had learned just now. Between his punches and kicks, there was a faint sound of wind and thunder, accompanied by a faint fiery glow. It had been half a year since he was brought here by Yunjiang. With Yunjiang's help, he had successfully entered the blood fusion gate and successfully entered the academy. He had once almost been unable to cultivate, so he especially cherished this hard-won opportunity. For the past few months, he had been unusually diligent, vaguely feeling that he could break through again. If he wanted to go further, he would need to find a way to break through the Yang Gate. From there, martial arts cultivators could use secret techniques to induce all kinds of magical abilities that only ferocious demons and monsters possessed. As for the level of magical abilities, it depended on what kind of demon the blood was fused with. Even the blood of the same kind could be divided into different levels. For example, the Lin clan, one of the 17 families of Lin Chuan Du's 9 families, fused with the blood came from the Sun Crown mystic winged fish, and it was taken from the Fish King. It was said that the Lin clan and the 1,000-year fish monster had reached a tacit understanding. Every year, they would send a large number of sacrifices, and every 15 years, the direct descendants of the Lin clan could go and collect their blood. So once they entered the Yang Gate, one could imagine how powerful they would be. Every time Hanwoo thought of this, he felt envious, but at the same time, he was also a little proud. Although his family background was not comparable, he had a good teacher, so he was not necessarily worse than those people. After finishing his training, he returned to his room, wiped his sweat, changed into clean clothes, picked up a book, opened a few pages, and began to read aloud. Lin Chuan Du was the capital of an kingdom. There were many academies here, and martial arts were flourishing. But it also paid attention to the administration of culture, and those who were talented in both literature and martial arts were especially valued by the imperial court. Moreover, those who did not understand the principles and had shallow knowledge could not reach the upper realm by relying on brute force. Even if they had some achievements, they could only be controlled by others, not controlled by others. Just now, after he read a few pages, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door, and a panicked voice said, "Brother Han, are you here? Quickly open the door, my life is at stake, my life is at stake." Hanwoo got off the bed, opened the door, and saw a young man in his 20s. Although he was wearing the uniform of the academy, his face was full of beard, and he was tall and sturdy. "So it's Chief Chen, I don't know." Chief Chen grabbed his hand and said anxiously, "What do you know? Someone is looking for trouble everywhere. Quickly come with me." Hanwoo said, "Wait, my book is still on the table." Chief Chen pulled him out of the room and said, "What time is it? Why are you still bringing a book?" Hanwoo had no choice but to follow him out, and asked, "Chief Chen, even if you want me to leave, you should at least tell me who is looking for trouble with me." Chief Chen sighed, "Don't ask any more, this is not just your problem. Do you have a place to stay outside the academy?" Hanwoo said, "I have a place, it's an elder's house." Chief Chen said, "That's good, although I can arrange it for you. I'm afraid it's not safe now. Remember not to go back to the academy for the next few days, hide for 10 days or half a month, and when Ding Shan comes back, you won't have to worry about them anymore." Hanwoo realized that this matter was not as simple as it seemed, but he was a little confused. Since he entered the academy, he only knew a few people and he didn't offend anyone. After a few questions, Chief Chen finally relaxed. He looked around and saw that no one was following him. He sighed and said, "Sometimes you don't provoke others, but it doesn't mean that others won't provoke you. I heard that you won first place in the internal exam a few days ago. Is that true?" Hanwoo said, "Is there anything wrong with it?" This was something he was very proud of. After the blood-fusing poison was cured, his cultivation speed became faster and faster. It was as if he was changing every day. However, he didn't know that Yunjiang had personally hunted 16 greater demons and fused their bloodline essences into his body so that he could smoothly enter the academy. She was afraid that he wouldn't be able to compete with his peers, so Yunjiang had personally hunted 16 greater demons and fused their bloodline essences into his body. Even the great imperial family probably didn't have such a deep foundation. Chief Chen sneered, "What's wrong with it? It's very wrong. Do you know why there hasn't been a student from a poor family who won first place in the internal exam for so many years? Is it because they are not good enough? No, it's just because they don't dare to get first place." Hanwoo's expression tightened. There were many people in the institute who didn't show their strength, but in fact, they were the descendants of important ministers in the imperial court. There were even a few who came from big families like the 9 families and the 17 families. When he thought that he might have broken some tacit rules, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Chief Chen squinted at him and said, "Do you understand now?" Then he sighed and said, "It's my fault that I didn't inform you in advance." But who would have thought that those who could compete for first place in the past would have already shown their extraordinary talent? Those people would send people to inform you, and then they would come up with conditions to exchange, or they would simply make you not participate in the competition. Don't you believe me? They have a lot of methods, but you are a variable. Hanwoo was also silent. He wanted to make a name for himself and make his teacher and people happy. But who would have thought that there was such a deep water behind him? At this time, the two of them had already arrived at the top of a hill. Station Elder Chen let out a sigh of relief and said, "If we go down from here, we'll be able to leave the institute. Brother Han, I'll send you off here. You must remember what I said." Hanwoo said, "Thank you, Chief Chen, I will go now." Chief Chen said, "Don't say anything, let's go." But at this moment, he heard a sneer. "Go. Do you think it's that easy?" The two of them were shocked. They turned around and saw a dozen people walking out from the forest not far away. The leader was a head taller than ordinary people, his body was strong, and his hands and feet were very thick. He looked like a human bear. Chief Chen's expression changed. "Ing Shuyu?" Ing Shuyu mocked. "Chief Feng's calculation is really accurate. As long as we let out the news, Shingai, you will quickly run out with your people. If you hide in the academy, it will be really hard for us to attack." Chief Chen's face became even uglier. It turned out that he had fallen into a trap. Not only was he not as strong as the opponent, but he also failed to see through such a simple trap. Ing Shuyu looked at Hanwoo and said, "Just a little kid from a small place, and he wants to be in the same class as the men of Chiliang Mountain, what a joke." Hanwoo calmed down at this moment. Except for Ing Shuyu, who he could not see through, it was very likely that he had already reached the moving Yang Gate. He was not afraid of the others, and it might not be a dead end. He secretly clenched his fist. Who cares who he is, where he came from, let's fight him first. Chief Chen said with emotion, "Brother Ing, you are wrong. When the academy was first established, the current Wulya Emperor had left a message under the snow pine in front of the door. 8 rivers and 10 mountains, share peace, all the people in the world, enjoy the Emperor's grace." This meant that no matter if it was a scholar or a commoner, they were all the Emperor's people, and they could all enter the academy to study. "Brother Bo Yu, do you think there is anything wrong with this?" Ing Shuyu snorted. His eloquence was not as good as the other party, and he could not continue the conversation. He also reacted quickly and immediately said, "Don't care about these useless things. Come, go. Just knock Chingai unconscious, break that kid's hands and legs, remember to keep him alive. The few chiefs still need him to remind those who do not have a good memory." Chapter 1459. In a simple house on the outskirts of Linchuan City, Yun Jiang was reading the books that Cambrian brought back. The Lu Dan Academy had a very rich collection of books. There were a total of 3 libraries, but most of the books could only be read in the academy, especially the books of secret techniques. The security was extremely strict, and no one could take them out. For this reason, there were people patrolling the library. But he had his own means. He gave Cambrian a reflection talisman from Guangyuan's sect, and he copied a lot of them. With Cambrian's current level, it was obvious that he couldn't come into contact with 2 advanced secret techniques, but he didn't expect this disciple to be able to do anything now. The cultivators of the 9 continents were still invading Junqian realm. He was just a vanguard, so he wouldn't pay attention to this place for the time being. He still had time to prepare. And the ancient books about the history of Jiaohua realm were not strictly guarded, and usually no one cared about them. But this was exactly what he was concerned about. He read these books and found that the earliest recorded dynasty was the Qian dynasty, but it was more than 10,000 years ago. Other than a general description, there were no details to be speculated. He also found that the Qian dynasty seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. There was no record of it before, as if it was deliberately destroyed by someone. So he inferred that the change in Jiaohua realm should be around the Qian dynasty. It was said that during the Qian dynasty, there were countless powerful cultivators, and now there were many palaces left, but most of them were isolated from the world, and only on special days could they be entered. He couldn't help but ponder. If he went there, he might be able to find something useful. While he was thinking, he put down the book and looked outside. After a long time, he heard Cambrian's uneasy voice coming from outside the courtyard. "Is teacher here?" Yunjiang said, "Come in and talk." The courtyard door was pushed open, and Cambrian walked in. His face was dirty, his body was covered with blood, and his clothes were a little tattered. Yunjiang looked at him and said, "Did you fight with someone?" Cambrian bowed his head and said, "Yes." Yunjiang replied, "Your master knows your temperament. Of course you wouldn't be the one to provoke others. Tell me what happened." Han Wu explained the whole story and said, "Ing Shuyu fought with me on the road. He is a warrior of Dongyang Pass, so I had to use all my strength to fight with him. But I couldn't stop myself, so I don't know if he is dead or alive." Yunjiang hummed, "What do you want to do?" Han Wu knelt down and kowtowed a few times on the ground. "I'm afraid this disciple can't go back, and I don't dare to implicate master." In order not to bring disaster to the sect, disciple is willing to go to the learning platform to receive punishment, but I'm ashamed of master's kindness. The school would never accept people of unknown origins. The rules were very strict. Every student's birthplace and identity had to be clearly written. Not only that, there had to be 3 local prominent clans acting as guarantors at the same time. Even if they couldn't find anyone else, they could still find their clan. Although Ing Shuyu was from a small clan, this time he was working for the person behind the scenes. These people had extraordinary means. If they wanted to deal with a small clan at the border, it was obviously a very easy thing. Yunjiang shook her head. "Your method is undoubtedly to ruin yourself. Moreover, do you think that if you take the initiative to receive punishment, you will be able to protect the sect?" Cambrian's body trembled, and his face turned a little pale. After all, he was only a 15 or 16-year-old boy. In his impulse, he only wanted to take responsibility for this matter, but he didn't think about the bigger picture. Yunjiang reached out and pulled him up. "Since you are my disciple, how can I not care about you? Moreover, how can my disciple be bullied by others?" Although it seemed that Cambrian had caused trouble this time, it was also a good opportunity to cut in. Originally, he wanted to wait a few more days for this disciple to gain some reputation in the school, and then slowly walk to the front. But now it seemed that this road was not so easy to walk. If that was the case, then he would use the simplest method. Cambrian anxiously said, "Master, I heard that there are not only Earth Vein warriors, but also the rumored Heaven Vein warriors." Yunjiang said, "Don't worry." He looked over. "Do you trust your master?" Cambrian nodded. Yunjiang said, "Then don't ask any more questions. Master will solve everything for you." Cambrian looked at Yunjiang's calm expression and inexplicably felt a little more confident. "Yes, master." Yunjiang said, "What secret art have you been practicing recently? Show it to master." Cambrian was taken aback. He had fought a fierce battle, left the city in the middle of the night, and ran all the way here without rest. He was very tired, but he had to obey his master's order. He gritted his teeth, dragged his heavy legs to the courtyard, and began to demonstrate what he had learned in the past. He had just experienced a sudden change, and now that he had calmed down, he felt that the parts that were usually difficult to understand were now smooth and smooth. Yunjiang looked at him for a moment and said, "This secret art can stimulate the blood of the monsters in the body of the blood fusion gate warriors. Although it is shallow, it has its own reason. This method is enough for ordinary people, but it is far from enough for you. I will teach you a set of breathing technique. You can use it when you practice in the future." Cambrian's secret art also had a set of corresponding breathing technique. The teacher who taught him secret art in the school had carefully reminded him that he must not make any mistakes. Otherwise, his body might be crippled, and in more serious cases, he might grow demon claws and scales in advance, and he would never be able to retract them, turning him into a complete monster. No one wanted to become like this, so everyone was trembling with fear when they practiced. They took one step and looked 3 steps ahead, for fear of making a mistake. But he trusted Yunjiang, so he did not hesitate to do it. After breathing in and out a few times, a wave of fiery energy spread through his limbs and bones. The blood in his body seemed to be boiling. Not only did he not feel uncomfortable, but he also felt very warm and comfortable. Even the fatigue from before was swept away. This feeling made him not want to stop at all. He practiced again and again, and as the number of times he practiced increased, he felt a surge of heat in his body, as if it was waiting to be released. He did not suppress it, and shouted loudly as he punched out at the same time. Boom! A streak of fire flashed out along with the force of the fist. The fence 10 feet in front of him was suddenly burned to ashes, and the ground 3 feet around him was scorched. Unconsciously, he was shocked. Looking at his own fist, he felt the strange heat in his body. With a trace of disbelief and excitement, he said, "This is the moving yang pass?" Yunjiang said, "According to what you learned in the school, when you use your fists and feet, you have indeed entered the moving yang gate. However, those who have just entered this realm are not as strong as those who have entered the blood fusion gate. Moreover, because of the unstable foundation, using the power of the blood will consume more energy, and if you can't hit your opponent, it can only be used to scare people." Cambrian thought back to the scene when Shuyu attacked, and it was indeed so. The latter's palm strike could send sand and stones flying, and it looked very powerful, but it was still very shaky, which gave him an opportunity to take advantage of. Yunjiang said, "You have only stimulated a small part of the blood fusion force, so you need to continue practicing. If you learn any more secret skills, I will teach you another breathing method." Cambrian's expression darkened. "I'm afraid I won't be able to learn it." Yunjiang laughed and said, "You will learn." He raised his head to look outside and said, "You came really fast." He thought that this place was not eye-catching, but the other party found this place in only an hour, so he must have used some kind of secret tracking method. After a while, he heard the sound of thunder coming from outside. It was very loud, and someone said coldly, "Student Cambrian is seriously injured. Instructor Shuyu, arrogant and unscrupulous, disrespectful to your teacher, and despise the rules of etiquette. Come out quickly and follow me back to receive your punishment." Cambrian couldn't help but feel a surge of anger in his heart. He had never heard that Instructor Shuyu was Instructor Shuyu, so he must have found a way to put this on later. The Yin dynasty had a strict hierarchy, and once this hat was put on him, it would not only affect him, but also those who were close to him. Yunjiang said, "Disciple, come with me to see this person." Cambrian said yes and followed him out of the courtyard. He saw a middle-aged warrior with an extraordinary aura standing there, green and white lightning flashing on his body from time to time. Cambrian felt his body going numb even before he got close. This person was originally arrogant, looking at Hanwu with a trace of contempt, but when he saw Yunjiang, his expression suddenly changed, a look of hesitation appeared on his face, then he took a few steps back, turned around, and was about to leave. Yunjiang said indifferently, "Since you are here, why are you in such a hurry to leave?" He stretched out his hand, and a huge hand made of cloud chi appeared out of thin air. It grabbed the man and dragged him back, then threw him on the ground, and looked in a certain direction. "If you want to save him, have your mountain elder come to me personally to ask for him." At this moment, a few miles away, there were 2 people standing on a high slope looking over, but when they saw Yunjiang's gaze, they felt their bodies stiffen. One of them, a thin old man, said with a serious expression, "This person is probably a Heaven Meridian Master." A man in a yellow robe next to him gasped, "Heaven Meridian Master?" After passing the Pure Sincerity Gate, a martial artist would extract the essence of metal and stone to form the Earth Meridian, and the next level would be to absorb the starlight into the body to form the Heaven Meridian. Such a person had the power to destroy cities and countries, and was not someone they could resist. They looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Originally, it was not their turn to capture a student who was at most at the Yang Gate, but because Cambrian had won first place in the test, some people in the Ludan Academy suspected that there might be other forces behind this, so they sent them here just in case. They did not expect to cause such big trouble, and the current situation was not something the two of them could handle. The man in the yellow robe was worried. Now that the mountain elder is not here, what should we do? As the capital of the Dan dynasty, Linchuan City was also guarded by more than one heaven meridian master, but now they had all been sent to the north by the imperial court. Rumor had it that an ancient demonic whale was found in a palace of the Qian dynasty, which attracted the masters of the Gan kingdom and the Xia kingdom to fight for it. The thin old man said in a deep voice, "A heaven meridian master must have a background, but this person does not seem to be from the Yin kingdom. Later, send someone to the government to look through the documents and find out where this person came from. It would be best if you can find someone who has a relationship with this person. Calm this person down first. I will send a letter to the mountain elder and ask him to come back and take charge of the situation." Chapter 1460. After several years of preparation, it took the sects of the 9 regions another 3 years to cross the void, and finally succeeded in sending the people of the various sects to the Great Dust Realm. This time, to ensure safety, the great Kuan Ingui personally sent them over. Although the various powers of the mountain and sea realm had arrived, they did not go to the designated areas. Instead, they began to build the formations in an orderly manner. Controlling the formations was equivalent to holding the throat of the Junqian realm. As long as nothing went wrong, the opponents would not be able to do anything. The disciples of the Qinsong sect and the Shaoqing sect set up new formations in the core areas of the former Yuliangism sect and the Qi accumulation palace. The 2 emperors, Bei Xiangtong and Rao Jifeng, each took charge. This way, the situation could be stabilized without the intervention of the 9 continents. Bei Xiangtong was very satisfied with this. Everything he had managed for 1,000 years was preserved. The cultivators of the 9 continents of the Yuliang left heaven domain were still left to him. They were not seized, and he only needed to pay a small amount of tribute. Rao Jifeng originally had some grudges, but he did not dare to act rashly under the absolute power of the cultivators of the 9 continents. But after he confirmed that the 9 continents did not reject the devil sect, and could even openly establish a sect, he threw all of that aside. In his eyes, as long as he could revive the devil sect, any price was worth it. The sects of the 9 continents carried out the plan of invading the Junqian realm step by step. On the other side, seeing that the people from beyond the heavens were invading, the cultivators of the Junqian realm were extremely terrified. The cultivators of the 9 continents had long anticipated this situation. They could not avoid the people of this realm standing against them. After entering the Junqian realm, they issued an edict to the heavens. It said that any cultivator who was willing to submit to the 9 continents, as long as their immortal's cave did not conflict with the designated area of the mountain and sea realm, they could be preserved. Even if they overlapped, there was no problem. The sects of the 9 continents would naturally set a new boundary for them, and they could also sign a contract that they would not randomly seize it. There was only one condition, which was to submit, and when necessary, listen to orders to exterminate those who did not submit. If you don't want to pledge allegiance, don't want to be bound by the 9 continents, and just want to cultivate freely, that's fine too. However, you need to create a name and pay an annual tribute. If that's the case, we won't bother you. This step actually had a deeper meaning. Not only was it to deal with the cultivators of Junqian Jie, but it was also to prepare for the next attack on Jiaohua Jie. Even though he didn't know the exact situation of the Hornflower realm, he had to plan this matter well in advance. When he really needed to use it, he could immediately send this power in. In the depths of the void, a silver occult orb was floating in the void. He Shuren stood in the hall with his hands behind his back, looking at the heavenly elemental sphere in front of him. As a disciple that the Qi accumulation palace had been secretly training, although he had not become a sovereign lord yet, his aptitude was unquestionable, and he had the support of an entire occult orb. If nothing went wrong, it would only be a matter of time before he became a sovereign lord. A Taoist in a green robe was standing next to him, pointing at the heavenly elemental sphere. In the end, he said, "Senior brother, that's about it." The people from the 9 continents have mainly occupied these 2 places. It seems that they have no intention of expanding for the time being. We still have a lot of time to prepare. He Shuren said, wrong. We don't have much time. If we don't take action now, the road ahead will be much more difficult. The Taoist in a green robe was puzzled. Why is that? He Shuren said in a deep voice, they are not taking action because they are trying to build the formation. Build the formation? The Taoist in a green robe said disdainfully, that day, they destroyed the formation, and the few sovereign lords of our sect couldn't rescue him in time. That's why our leader was besieged and killed. If they can do that, so can we. They can build as many formations as they want, and we can destroy them all. He Shuren said, it's not that simple. The Qi Accumulation Palace did not expect the people of the mountain and sea realm to attack us, and we wanted to abandon our realm. That's why we didn't set up any defense in advance. But if we had prepared in advance, even if they could destroy 1 or 2 formations, they wouldn't have been able to destroy all of them. Now, the situation we are facing is even more dangerous. We can't even get close, let alone do anything. The Taoist in a green robe was stunned by his solemn tone. He murmured, then what should we do? He Shuren said resolutely, no matter how difficult it is, we have to find a way to do it. Otherwise, how can the Qi Accumulation Palace be revived? The Taoist in a green robe said with determination, Senior brother, I'll listen to you. Whatever you say, I'll do it. He Shuren thought for a moment and said, I'm afraid it won't be enough with just the strength of my sect. I think it's better to find the disciples of the Qi Accumulation Palace. Only by working together will we have a chance. The Yuliangism was not the only sect that secretly left disciples. All the sects with a bit of influence did the same, and the Qi Accumulation Palace was no exception. Although it was the latter who gave away an occult orb, it had a history of more than 100,000 years. There were more than what they seemed on the surface. The Taoist in a green robe was troubled. But we don't know where they are. How can we find them? He Shuren said, there is a way. Before the leader and Yang Chuan discussed the conquest of the mountain and sea realm, they not only signed a contract to gain trust, but also gave each other an occult orb. I found out that the contract was taken away by Senior Brother Shah. As long as we can find Senior Brother Shah, we can find the occult orb. I believe we can find the people of the Qi Accumulation Palace. The Taoist in a green robe said, Senior Brother Shah, you can try to find him as long as he hasn't joined the 9 continents. He Shuren sighed and said, we have to hurry. It's not that I don't trust Senior Brother Shah, but even Bei Xiangtong and Rao Jifeng have joined the 9 continents. I don't know how many of our original sect members can hold on. Bei Xiangtong and Rao Jifeng joining the 9 continents was not only their own business. In the Junqian realm, the sovereign emperors had a great reputation. Their every move could affect most people. Moreover, the 9 continents' advantage was so great that it could make people feel hopeless. Even the most determined people could be shaken. The Taoist in a green robe hesitated and said, if Senior Brother Shah has really made a mistake and wants to join the 9 continents, what will you do? He Shuren said coldly, then I might have to clean up the sect for the leader. The Taoist in a green robe said, all right, I will make the arrangements now. He was about to take a step when He Shuren called him back and said solemnly, Junior brother, don't expose yourself. If you find out that Senior Brother Shah has joined the 9 continents, then it's impossible. Come back. The Taoist in a green robe lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, even if Senior Brother Shah has really joined the 9 continents, Senior Brother must have a way, right? He Shuren didn't speak for a long time. He turned to look at the depths of the void and said slowly, if things really reach the worst step, when it's necessary, we can only pretend to join them and wait for a chance. Hornflower Boundary, Lin Chuan Capital, Ancient Stone Ruin City. A dozen people in luxurious robes stood under a stone platform. Most of these people were students from the Lu Dan Academy, and some were from the government. All of them looked anxious, as if they were waiting for someone. After an unknown period of time, the strange engravings on the stone platform flickered with fluorescent light. Then, a dazzling light shone out, causing everyone to close their eyes. After the light was extinguished, A short blue-robed old man with thick white eyebrows appeared on the stone platform. Although he looked very inconspicuous, those with discerning eyes could feel it. There was a vast whaley hidden in this person's body, which was daunting. The people below all cupped their hands and said respectfully, "Mountain Elder." One of the students with the surname Gong walked out from the crowd and said, "Greetings, Mountain Elder." The old man looked around and sighed. "You guys? How did you get into such a mess when I wasn't around? 3 days? Fortunately, this bag of old bones still has some face in front of His Majesty and used the void-treading stone platform left behind by the Chen dynasty. Otherwise, how could I come back in time to clean up this mess for you guys?" Everyone lowered their heads, and the student with the surname Gong looked even more ashamed. "I also didn't expect things to turn out like this. It's all because I didn't manage them well and failed, Mountain Elder." The old man looked at him and shook his head. Inspector Wang Tianchu walked out and said with a solemn face, "Mountain Elder Zheng, since this matter has already happened, no matter what, we need to find a way to solve it. Once a Heaven Meridian Realm expert starts a fight in the city, there will be countless casualties in the city. You and I won't be able to explain it to His Majesty." Mountain Elder Zheng's expression also became serious, and he said, "Did you ask about that person's background?" Wang Tianchu said, "No. Not only our nation, even Gan Nation and Xian Nation don't have such a person. It's possible that he came from the north." Mountain Elder Zheng stroked his beard and thought for a while, then said, "Not necessarily. Heaven Meridian Realm experts all have names and surnames. If there's really no trace to be found, then it's very likely that he came from there." Wang Tianchu's expression changed. At his position, he could already know a lot of secrets that no one else knew. His face showed a bit of seriousness. If this person really came from there, this matter will be troublesome. Everyone didn't understand what he was saying, but they faintly felt that this person's background might be very powerful. Mountain Elder Zheng kept his composure and said, "This old man is just guessing. We have to go and see first to know." Wang Tianchu nodded with a sullen face. Mountain Elder Zheng said, "Where is that person now?" Scholar Gong said, reporting to Mountain Elder, "In the outskirts of the eastern city. I didn't dare to send people to directly watch over the carving shop. I only sent people to pay attention at the various intersections, but I can confirm that this person hasn't left." Mountain Elder Zheng said, "It's not far from here. This old man can go there alone. Fortunately, it's not in the city. In case of a fight, this old man will lead him to another place." Wang Tianchu solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Mountain Elder Zheng, please." Mountain Elder Zheng nodded solemnly. He stamped his feet, and a ray of starlight rose from the flat ground. In a split second, he flew into the sky and flew towards the east. Everyone couldn't help but be shocked. This was a Heaven Meridian Realm expert. They had already surpassed the limits of a martial artist. They had gone through hundreds and thousands of training and could even fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. Using the power of stars to fight against the enemy, destroying a city and destroying a country was not a problem. Wang Tianchu frowned. If two Heaven Meridian Realm experts fought, even if Lin Chuan wasn't damaged, he, the school inspector, couldn't escape responsibility. He could only hope that nothing would happen. Chapter 1461. After Yun Jiang captured the people from the Lu Dan institution, he threw them in the backyard. People who practiced secret techniques would be fine even if they didn't eat or drink for a few days. At most, they would just be a bit weaker and unable to display their original strength. However, if the people from the Lu Dan institution came too late, they could only fend for themselves. On this day, he was teaching Cambrian how to practice secret techniques when he suddenly sensed something. He ordered Cambrian to return to the house, then casually set up a few formation flags and came out of the house. Looking over, he saw a beam of dazzling starlight coming from the sky, and he could see a figure wrapped in the light. He thought to himself, receiving the starlight and using it to fly. That should be the heavenly meridian warrior that the people of this realm talk about. Although the great demons of the mountain and sea realm could also receive the starlight, that was only after their cultivation had reached a certain level. However, secret warriors could do it at this level. Although the difference in power was too great, it couldn't be denied that there was something unique about it. The starlight quickly approached, but it fell down and smashed into the ground, instantly creating a huge pit in front of the house. Mountain Elder Zheng withdrew the surging starlight from his body, and his body floated out. It wasn't that he wanted to show off by making such a big noise, but it was easy to use the power of the stars to fly up, but it was difficult to land. That power was not easy to restrain. Fortunately, his body was tough enough to withstand the impact. He looked at Yun Jiang with a slight surprise in his eyes. He couldn't see through the strength of the person in front of him. He was even more certain of his previous judgment. Only there could be such a person. He stepped forward and clasped his hands, saying, "Are you Mr. Yun?" Yun Jiang returned the greeting and said, "That's me." Mountain Elder Zheng looked apologetic and said, "The people of my institution didn't know what was good for them and offended you. I've come to apologize to you. If you have any requests, please tell me. As long as I can do it, I'll do it." Yun Jiang didn't say much. He thought for a moment and said, "3 conditions." Mountain Elder Zheng said seriously, "Please speak." Yun Jiang said, "First, I don't care who you choose, but there must be a proper end to the matter of making things difficult for my disciple." He knew that this matter involved many people. If he didn't want to raise the Lu Dan Academy to the ground or start a war with the Yin Kingdom, he wouldn't be able to find all the people behind the scenes. In the end, he would only be able to punish a few scapegoats. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to pursue it. When Cambrian grew up in the future, if he still held a grudge, he could just settle the score with him. Elder Jingshan let out a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the other side would propose a condition that he couldn't accept. If that was the case, he could only choose to fight in the end. This condition was acceptable to him. Yun Jiang continued, "Second, if the first thing is done, Cambrian will return to your institute. As for the arrangement, you can decide it yourselves." Elder Jingshan said, "Don't worry, Cambrian won the first place in this competition. I will accept him as my student. As long as I still have my face, this kind of thing will not happen again in the future, but I don't know what the third condition is." Yun Jiang looked up and said, "I want to take a look at the Academy's scripture library." Elder Jingshan was startled. However, heavenly meridian warriors almost stood in this world. Although there were many books in the Lu Dan Academy, even if they read them, they would at most be used for reference and would not be of much use. As for spreading them out, if a heavenly meridian warrior wanted to do so, there was no need for him to read other people's books. Elder Jingshan pondered in his heart that there might be something in the Academy's books that he did not know about, and the other party had specially come to look for it. Thus, he decided to pay more attention. On the surface, he said straightforwardly, "I can agree to this condition. However, to go to the scriptures and view the books, there needs to be a justifiable status. Is it possible to invite Sir Yun to be my house's student?" "Sir Yun, don't worry, this is just an explanation to the school, there won't be any restrictions." Yun Jiang pondered for a moment. His original plan was to sneak up to them from behind, so it would be easier for him to act with such an identity. He said, "You can make your own arrangements." Up to this point, the conversation was almost over. However, Mountain Jiang didn't leave. He asked tentatively, "Mr. Yun, may I ask, where did you come from?" Yun Jiang's heart moved. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have touched something, but he didn't pretend to be mysterious and agree. If there was really something hidden behind this world, he would be able to find it. He shook his head and said, "I don't know where you are talking about, I don't come from." However, Elder Jingshan seemed to be certain, and said with understanding, "I know your difficulties." In fact, no matter whether Yun Jiang came from there or not, he had to treat him as a person from there. In this way, he would have something to say in front of the Wulya Emperor, and the Lu Dan Academy would also be able to get out of this matter. Yun Jiang didn't argue. What other people thought had nothing to do with him. He just said, "The person I captured is in the woodshed. You can take him back." Half a month later, the Lu Dan Academy issued an edict. More than 10 students were expelled from the school due to the crime of harming their fellow students. Among them, Ing Shuyu, as a teacher, actually took the lead to bully students. His crime was even more serious, and his bloodline was erased. From then on, he could no longer cultivate. In another 10 days, Mountain Jiang accepted the poor student, Hanwu, as his student. It became a good story for a while. At this time, Yun Jiang appeared in the scripture pavilion. In front of him, there was a director leading the way. "Student Yun, please come this way. The books below are just for the students to read. Those at the top of the pavilion are secret techniques just now." He walked up the spacious wooden building that could accommodate 7 people side by side. Finally, at the top of the 9th floor, he found that this place could accommodate 1,000 people. What he saw were rows of large bookshelves. The director pointed at the books in front of him and said proudly, "Although my Ludan Academy has only been established for 30 years, it was formerly known as the Balance Temple Academy. This academy has a heritage of 2,000 years. Most of the ancient books here were obtained from there. It's a pity that more than 10 academies participated in this matter. So far, we have only obtained 10% of it." At the end of his words, he sighed. Yun Jiang nodded. This was an unexpected gain. After reading the books here, he could probably go elsewhere to find a way to read them. He took a few steps forward. Suddenly, he felt something strange in his senses. Turning his head to the side, he saw that there were more than 20 large books placed horizontally on the bookshelves. However, the materials used to hold them were not paper or jade bamboo, but polished and smooth pieces of bone. The director followed his gaze and praised, "Mr. Yun has good eyesight." He praised, "Mr. Yun, you have a good eye." These bone books were passed down from the Qian dynasty. It is said that in order to facilitate preservation, they were carved out of bone. Few people can recognize the words written on them now. Yun Jiang walked forward and took down a piece of bone. He touched it with his hand, but his eyes narrowed. He could recognize that these bone pieces that carried the characters were all obtained from the cloud whale. Perhaps there was a senior elder of the dark cloud tribe among them. In that case, the so-called Qian dynasty could obtain this item. Even if it had nothing to do with Lu, they most likely knew its whereabouts. If he followed this clue, he might be able to find the true reason for the changes in this world. For the next 2 days, he spent his time in the scripture pavilion flipping through these bone slips. Although the words on them were difficult to understand, after some inference and with the help of many other ancient books, he was able to get a general idea of what they were. Most of them were only records of temple priests and the like, and did not contain what he was looking for. However, there were several sutra pavilions in Ludan Academy, and some bone books were not placed here. So he turned to another place, and after a careful search, he found something. This place was also related to sacrifices, but among the sacrifices, there were records of a number of ape monster heads being offered, and the number was in the thousands. This made him excited. He tried to sense it, and found that the engraved words in front of him were even more ancient than those he had seen before. Then the so-called ape monster is likely to be Lu. In that case, the Qian dynasty is their enemy, but there is no human race in the Jiaohua realm. Where did this force come from? If the Qian dynasty could fight with Lu, then their strength would definitely not be weak. At least, they were not comparable to the so-called secret warriors he had seen. Thinking of Mountain Elder Zheng and the people from there, he couldn't help but think. Just when he was thinking about whether or not to go and find out, Mountain Elder Zheng took the initiative to find him. After a few words, he said, "Mr. Yun, an ancient monster whale appeared in the north, so I have to go north in a few days. I'm afraid I can't stay in the academy. I have already arranged for Cambrian. Even if I'm not here, there will be someone to teach him." Hearing this, Yun Jiang's heart shook. He pretended to be confused and asked, "Ancient monster whale? Is there still such a big monster nowadays?" Mountain Elder Zheng said, "This is also luck. The monster whale was originally hiding in a big palace of the Qian dynasty. We speculated that it was sleeping for some reason, so it was able to survive from the ancient times until now. However, recently it woke up for some reason, and then it sensed danger, so it went back. Now, many Heaven Meridian cultivators from various countries are heading there, trying to capture it. Mayan Kingdom also had people going there. I was originally among them, but something happened at the academy, so I had to come back. Yun Jiang immediately realized that this fellow clansman had most likely woken up because of the connection between their bloodlines. He secretly made up his mind that no matter what, he couldn't let this member of the same race fall into the hands of these secret warriors. After thinking about it, he asked, "Mountain Elder Zheng, what does the monster whale look like? Can you take me to see it?" Mountain Elder Zheng said, "Oh, is Mr. Yun also interested in this monster whale? Why not? Mr. Yun is now a student of the Lu Dan Academy. You can go there and fight for it." Hearing that Yun Jiang was willing to go, he was overjoyed. An ancient monster whale could create many masters of the blood fusion gate, and each of them had unlimited potential, so it attracted many countries to fight for it. The number of Heaven Meridian cultivators in the Yin Kingdom couldn't compare to that of the Gong Kingdom and the Xia Kingdom, and he had to come back because of the Academy's business. 2 days ago, there was a letter saying that the ancient road lock outside the palace was about to be opened, and the monster whale had nowhere to run. It urged him to quickly go north after the matter was settled, so he had the idea to win over Yun Jiang. Yun Jiang looked outside and said, "Since it's urgent, then there's no need to delay. I will talk to Han Wu for a bit, and then I will go with Mountain Elder Zheng." Chapter 1462. Another 5 years passed in the Xinyuan small world. Zhang Yan was still sitting on the mountain peak. He was cultivating and looking at the treasure fetus below him. Now this thing had changed again. On the dragon heart, one end was connected by countless starlights that looked like pipes, and the other end went straight to the sky, extending into the endless depths. This was a necessary step to refine this magic treasure. Once it was refined, the entire small world would merge with it. However, this process would last for a very long time, probably hundreds of years. There was a flash of spiritual light in the air, and Mountain River Child appeared. He bowed to him. After a while, Zhang Yan stopped his cultivation and sat down. He asked, "Is there any news from the Hornflower Boundary?" Mountain River Child said, "Master, Venerable Wei's disciple sent a message not long ago. He said that he had already learned from some people that there was indeed another hidden force in the Hornflower Boundary. Above the many human countries, there was still a higher realm. However, it seemed to be a little different from the lower and lower realms that the cultivators mentioned." Zhang Yan made an "oh" sound and asked, "What's the difference?" Mountain River Child said, "It seems that there is no need to pass through the void primordial sea to cross between the upper and lower realms. It is similar to the turbid azure sky in the mountains and seas. I heard that the spiritual vigor there is even denser than the lower realm." From this, Venerable Wei's disciple deduced that it is very likely that the original Hornflower Boundary was a place with abundant spiritual vigor. However, it was separated by the mana of the great mediums. Because the situation in that realm is unclear, he asked the realm if he should try to enter the so-called higher realm to explore. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "That disciple of Zihong is still in the Yuaning realm?" Mountain River Child said, "Just now, he has cultivated to Yuaning not long ago." Zhang Yan said, "Although he is a cloud whale that has entered Dao, there are many things that he cannot force himself to do if his cultivation is not high enough. Moreover, it is difficult to judge the truth of that world with just words before it is verified. Tell him to be careful and not to act rashly. He can wait in that world and wait for the right time." Yun Jiang had said that the Hornflower realm didn't seem to have any powerful figures, but it wasn't because the beings in this realm were lacking in intelligence. It was because the world's spirit chi was insufficient, and they were destined to be unable to advance to a higher level. However, if there really was an upper realm controlling everything, it was not something that a Yuanian cultivator could handle. Mountain River Child said, "Yes, I will pass on Master's words without missing a word." A few years ago, a great battle broke out in the Hornflower Boundary over an ancient demon whale. More than 10 countries were involved, but in the end, the Yin Kingdom, which was in the middle, emerged victorious and successfully took away the demon whale. However, it was rumored that the demon whale did not fall into the hands of the Yin Kingdom's royal family. Instead, it was obtained by an unknown heavenly meridian warrior. It was also this person who defeated the heavenly meridian warriors of various countries that day, and no one present could defeat him. After this incident, the various forces inquired about his background, but the Yin Kingdom kept it a secret. Later, no one knew what news they heard, but the various countries fell silent for a while and withdrew all the manpower that they had sent out. Soon, another half a year passed. On this day, a whirlpool of spiritual light suddenly appeared in the sky above the hornflower boundary. Then, a brocade cloud floated out from it, and two young people, a man and a woman, stood on it. The man looked spirited and handsome, and the woman had a cinnabar mole between her eyebrows, delicate and pure. The woman sensed the spirit chi in the realm and frowned slightly, saying, "Senior Brother Jean, the spirit chi here is so weak." Senior Brother Jean smiled at her and comforted her. "Junior Sister Sue, we are here for official business. Bear with it for a while. When we are done, we can go back." The woman curled her lips and said, "There are many lower realms like this in my palace. Even if there is an ancient demon whale here, so what? It is worthy of Senior Brother's attention." Senior Brother Jean shook his head and said, "Junior Sister, you are thinking too simply. The origin of the ancient demon whale's bloodline is the void mutant. Between each other, they can know where their clansmen are based on the bloodline. I heard that in ancient times, the cloud whales of this realm migrated. If they landed somewhere in the void or died, it would be good, but if they were caught by those demons and followed the bloodline, it would be a disaster." When the woman heard this, her expression changed. She knew that if they really attracted the attention of a supreme great demon, then it would be useless even if they closed the door between the two worlds. It would be easy for them to find their original location. Thinking of this, she also felt that this was not a small matter. She didn't dare to relax anymore. She slightly corrected her attitude and said, "Senior Brother Jean, then what are you waiting for? I don't want to stay here for a moment. Why don't we go and finish this matter and go back to report?" Senior Brother Jean smiled and said yes, but he knew that although what he said was very serious, the possibility of this was actually very small. Otherwise, he and Junior Sister Sue would not be sent here. This was just to take care of them, so that they could add a beautiful stroke to the Golden Book without much effort. The two first went to the Qian Dynasty Palace. After hearing that the demon whale had been taken away by the people of the Yin Kingdom, they went straight to the south. After arriving at the capital of the Yin Kingdom, Zhenbei City, they directly found the royal family of the Yin Kingdom, revealed their identity, and asked them to hand over the ancient demon whale. After the Wuye Emperor learned about this, because he knew that Yun Jiang's origin was mysterious, and he was nominally a member of the Lu Dan Academy, but in fact, he was not under the control of the Yin Kingdom. Therefore, he very decisively sent people to the south, secretly ordered Elder Zhengshan to control Cambrian first, and then went to persuade Yun Jiang to hand over the demon whale. Since Yun Jiang brought his clansmen back to the Yin Kingdom, he placed them in a large lake. This place was more than 5,000 miles away from Lin. Although it looked far, with his cultivation, it was only a short distance away. He didn't care about the outside world. He built a hut by the lake to take care of them. This clansman had been sleeping for a long time and was already very weak. It was only awakened by his bloodline. After coming out, it was besieged by the heavenly meridian warriors and was seriously injured. After escaping with great difficulty, it was already on the verge of death. Fortunately, Yun Jiang had brought a lot of chi-replenishing pills before he came, which barely saved its life. However, it still hadn't woken up yet. But in recent days, he always had a sense of uneasiness, as if danger was approaching. Out of caution, he first sent a letter to Cambrian, and then set up a barrier around this clansman. A few days later, a swallow came with a letter in its mouth. When he took it down and looked at it, his expression turned cold. Long before he separated from Cambrian, he had set up a secret code in advance. Every time he sent a letter, there must be a secret mark on it. Now that the letter was gone, there must be a problem. Who is going against me? I have seen all the heavenly meridian warriors in the Yin Kingdom, and no one is my opponent. It should be because they have strong reinforcements from outside. Could it be? While he was pondering, his expression suddenly changed. He walked out of the hut and looked up. In the distance he saw a brocade cloud coming over. There were 3 people coming, Mountain Elder Zheng and 2 strangers, a man and a woman, who he had never seen before. They looked like they were not common people. Elder Zheng Shan said a few words to the man and the woman, and then landed alone. He came to the front, cupped his hands and said, "Mr. Yun, how have you been recently?" Yun Jiang looked at the sky and said, "These days, thanks to Elder Zheng Shan for giving me convenience." Elder Zheng Shan sighed. It seems that Mr. Yun really is not from that place. Yun Jiang said, "I have never admitted it." Elder Zheng Shan thought for a while and said, "I will not hide it from Mr. Yun. The 2 behind me came from that place. Now, I want Mr. Yun to hand over the demon whale. This request is not too much. As long as you let them take it away, everything will end peacefully." Yun Jiang sneered, "Why should this Yun obey the wishes of these 2? If it was something else, he would weigh the pros and cons, and when it was time to compromise, he would compromise. But when it involved his clansmen, he would not compromise no matter what." Elder Zheng Shan shook his head and said, "I don't know where Mr. Yun learned his power from. Perhaps he received the inheritance from some Qian dynasty palace, or perhaps he was taught by a truth realization state Qianbei. However, you need to understand that the power of that place is beyond ordinary people's imagination. It's really not something we can fight against. Mr. Yun has already formed heaven meridians. What use does that ancient demonic whale have? Even if there is some secret technique, with your ability, you can just find another one in the future. Why bother? Why do you have to provoke such a powerful enemy? Isn't it better to give them some face?" Yun Jiang said decisively, "Elder Zheng Shan, you don't need to say anything, I will not agree to this." Elder Zheng Shan frowned. "Mr. Yun doesn't think for yourself. Do you not care about the lives of your disciples?" There was a hidden threat in his words, but Yun Jiang only sneered. Han Wu had the protection talisman he left on him. In times of danger, he could escape. Not to mention that the Jiaohua boundary couldn't stop him. Even a Yuanian cultivator wouldn't be able to do anything to him. While they were talking here, junior sister Su was a little impatient from waiting. She said, "Zheng Jianwu, have you finished negotiating?" Elder Zheng Shan saw that Yun Jiang had no intention of backing down, so he sighed heavily and cupped his hands. "Mr. Yun, that's all I have to say. Take care of yourself." While he was talking, he had already retreated and bowed. Emissaries. Junior sister Su was about to step forward and make a move, but senior brother Jean stopped her. He walked forward alone and followed him. A surging qi activity was released from his body. He looked down and said calmly, "I don't know where you get your confidence from. Hand over the ancient whale, and I won't make things difficult for you today." Yun Jiang sneered, "No need to say more. Whatever you have, I will take it on." The girl looked at him with a hint of mockery in her eyes. A little Tianmai mystic warrior trapped in this world, how could he know how big the sky was, how wide the earth was, and who he was fighting against? Brother Jean shook his head. He flipped his palm, took out a dazzling light and threw it down. Then he stood with his hands behind his back and sighed, "What a pity." Elder Zheng Shan revealed an expression of fear and reluctance. He had heard about the power of that spirit light. According to the rumors, any heavenly meridian warrior couldn't resist in front of it. As long as they were illuminated by it, their flesh and blood would immediately melt, leaving behind only a skeleton. However, in the next moment, he widened his eyes and revealed a look of shock. Brother Jean was also stunned. A cloud of qi rushed out from Yun Jiang's body, blocking the light in the sky. He looked up and said, "I was wondering what you were relying on, so it's just a spirit treasure. If you don't have any other means, then stay here today." As he spoke, another spiritual light flew out from the fontanelle and enveloped Senior Marshal Brother Jean and Senior Marshal Brother Zhang. Chapter 1463. Senior Marshal Brother Jean only wanted to take out his magic treasure and deal with this person. He didn't expect the other person to also have a magic treasure. By the time he realized it and wanted to dodge the light, it was already too late. He felt all the energy in his body dissipate and he fell from the sky. Junior Marshal Sister Sue was even worse. She didn't have any experience, so she didn't know how to react. Her body softened, and she also fell down. Mountain Elder Jing realized that something was wrong. He didn't know what kind of trick the two of them had been hit by. If they fell to their deaths, Yun Jiang would be the culprit, but he wouldn't be able to escape responsibility either. Thus, he hurriedly waved out a ray of light and supported the two of them before placing them firmly on the ground. Senior Marshal Brother Jean's mind was still clear. It was just that he was originally high and mighty, but in just a moment he was knocked down to the ground. He was shocked and angry and said in embarrassment, "Do you know who we are?" Junior Marshal Sister Sue had never encountered something like this before. Previously, no matter which lower realm she went to, the natives there would always be respectful to her. Who would have thought that someone actually dared to attack them? She was originally very scared, but after hearing what Senior Marshal Brother Jean said, she also said with a trembling voice, "Why are you still not letting us go? Otherwise, if the palace finds out, you will be smashed into pieces." Yun Jiang walked up, looked down, and said, "I know you guys have a background, but do you know who I am?" Jean and Sue were shocked. Only now did they realize that something was wrong. Not only could the opponent block their magic weapon, but he could also use magic weapon to fight back. It was very likely that he wasn't a native from the lower realm. Junior Marshal Sister Sue immediately thought of that supreme demon and couldn't help but shiver. You are. Seeing that she suddenly became so scared, it wasn't hard for Yun Jiang to infer that the place where they came from also had enemies. He thought that he should interrogate them later, and he should be able to get a lot of valuable information out of them. But before that, there was still one thing he needed to do. He turned around and looked at Mountain Elder Zheng. Seeing that Yun Jiang was looking at him, Mountain Elder Zheng was shocked and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Yun Jiang asked, "Where is Han Wu?" Seeing that Yun Jiang's expression was normal, Mountain Elder Zheng let out a sigh of relief and said, "Han Wu is fine. When I came out, I ordered a disciple to protect him. No one can hurt him." Yun Jiang pointed at the ground and said, "Does Mountain Elder Zheng know where those two people came from?" Elder Zheng Shan smiled bitterly. "This old man doesn't know much. Mr. Yun, why don't you ask the person in charge?" Yun Jiang looked at him, nodded, and said, "All right, considering Elder Zheng Shan's previous words, I won't make things difficult for you. I'll have to trouble you to bring my disciple here." With Jean and Sue here, he wasn't afraid of the other party playing any tricks. Elder Zheng Shan hurriedly agreed. All right, I will bring him here. Please, Mr. Yun, have mercy." He cupped his fists again and flew away on the starlight. Yun Jiang waved his hand, and a gust of wind rose from the ground, sending Jean and Sue into the house. However, to avoid being dishonest, he separated the two of them. He first went to Senior Marshal Brother Jean and asked, "How do I address the two of you, and where are you from?" Senior Marshal Brother Jean couldn't move at all, and he couldn't use his magic power either. He wasn't inexperienced like Junior Marshal Sister Sue, who panicked before the others said anything. He could see that Yun Jiang's actions were nothing like those vicious demons. But even so, if he didn't say anything, he would still suffer. Instead, if he said it, he might be able to intimidate the other party. Thus, he said, "I am Jean Moping, a disciple of the Great Might Heavenly Palace. This is my junior martial sister, Su Weining. May I know who you are?" Yun Jiang ignored his question and continued to ask, "Then what kind of place is the Great Might Heavenly Palace?" Jean Moping's spirit rose slightly and he said, "My Great Might Heavenly Palace is located beyond the heavens. The Yunshu realm is a great spirit upper realm. Don't look at how vast the Horned Flower realm is, but it is only one of the dozens of lower realms." Yun Jiang's expression didn't change, but he was shocked inside. If this person isn't exaggerating, to be able to control dozens of lower realms, his strength is truly impressive. He asked again, "May I know who is the leader, and what is his cultivation level?" Jean Moping sighed. I am only a low-level disciple, so how would I know about the big shots above? However, I once heard from my master that my heavenly palace's founding master has the ability to create and destroy a realm. His remarkable ability is truly indescribable. Yun Jiang calculated in his heart. If the founding master of the heavenly palace really had such ability, then it was very likely that he was a true Yang Almighty. But whether it was true or not was still debatable. Especially under such circumstances, it was more likely that it was not true. As Jean Moping spoke, he kept staring at Yun Jiang, but the latter's expression didn't change at all. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, and at the same time, a trace of fear appeared in his heart. His words clearly didn't deter the other party. Yun Jiang said, "Since your great might heavenly palace is so impressive, why have you come here to covet a demon whale?" Jean Moping was a little embarrassed and said, "I heard that the ancient demon whale's blood essence can be refined into a type of elixir that can enhance one's cultivation. I was greedy, so I brought my junior sister here to seize it. I didn't expect that this demon whale has already caught your eye." Yun Jiang sneered inside. He could tell that this person's expression was just an act, and his words were obviously not the truth. He should be hiding something. But it didn't matter. He would ask Su Weiniang later, and it wouldn't be difficult to know the real answer. "Let me ask you again, how do you travel between the two realms?" He was very interested in this. At first, he thought that Elder Jing Shan said that the upper realms were in something similar to the turbid azure sky, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case at all. Jean Moping said, "Hornflower Boundary is my lower realm. With a token, I can come over." Yun Jiang frowned. "Oh, you have never crossed the void primordial sea?" Jean Moping revealed a blank expression and said, "Void primordial sea? What is that?" Yun Jiang's heart moved slightly. He knew that there must be another reason behind this. After asking a few more questions, he waved his hand and isolated this person's consciousness. After that, he went to Su Weiniang's place. This woman was far inferior to his senior martial brother. Under his half-truths and half-lies, she spilled out almost everything she knew. However, the two of them were only low-level disciples. Even if they were the juniors of certain elders in the Great Might Heavenly Palace, their knowledge was still very limited. As for what exactly was going on in the upper echelons of the palace, the two of them actually did not know. They had only heard rumors. After laying down a restriction around the two of them, Yun Jiang walked out and returned to the praying mat. He sat down and pondered carefully. Originally, when he received the message from the lower realm, he planned to lie low in the Hornflower Boundary and wait for the 9 provinces to send people over. But now that this had happened, it was a little troublesome. If the Great Might Heavenly Palace sensed that the two of them had been captured, they would definitely send people to rescue them. It wasn't that he was afraid of them, but that he was facing a void boundary. Even if he could defeat them once or twice, once an almighty expert appeared, he wouldn't be able to stop them. The only way to be safe was to leave this place immediately. But at the moment, his fellow clansmen were unconscious, and he didn't have the ability to take them with him. He could only think of a way to delay. Fortunately, Jean Moping had come to this pocket realm for half a year. It had only been a few days, and there was still a year to go. He still had enough time to prepare. But no matter what, he had to first report what had happened. He flew up into the air and landed on a nearby mountain range. He had already carved out an immortal's cave here, and he had placed the spell formation and talismans he had brought from the mountain and sea realm and Mengzhen's talismans there so that no one would discover them. He walked into the immortal's cave, closed the stone door, and took out the 2-realm dial. He placed his hand on it, and before long, there was a flash of spiritual light, and Mengzhen's figure gradually appeared. He hurriedly stood up, clasped his hands, and said, "Mengzhen, disciple has an important matter to report." Mengzhen said in a low voice, "Speak." Yun Jiang gave a detailed account of what had happened. After listening, Mengzhen thought for a moment, then said, "It's best that you come back now." If the other side was a Qinsong school disciple, he would have directly summoned him back out of consideration for his safety. But Yun Jiang's status was not ordinary. Not only was he a member of the Dark Cloud tribe, but he was also Wei Zihong's disciple in name. It wouldn't be good for him to bypass the Yao Yin clan and give him orders. Yun Jiang bowed and said, "Disciples' clansman is still here, but I can't abandon him and return alone. There is still half a year left, so I'm willing to wait a little longer. If I can't find him, disciple will make a decision." Meng Zhen looked at him for a moment, then said, "Then you're on your own." Yun Jiang respectfully nodded. Meng Zhen's figure gradually disappeared, and the spiritual light also dimmed. Yun Jiang went forward and checked the dual realm dial. Previously he had used it twice. After using it this time, he needed to accumulate spiritual opportunity again. If he was in the Junchen world, he would only need about 10 years to accumulate spiritual opportunity. However, Jiao Hua's spiritual opportunity did not flourish, so it might last longer. Hence, he might not be able to contact the middle realm for the time being. However, distant water could not quench the present thirst. Even if the mountain and sea realm sent people here, they would not arrive in half a year. Now he could only rely on himself. After thinking for a while, he buried the two-realm dial, then left the immortal's cave and returned to the house to wait. 3 days later, a cloud of dust could be seen approaching at an extremely fast speed. It was Mountain Elder Zheng returning with Cambrian. Because he was carrying a person, he did not use any flying techniques, but instead ran on the ground. When he arrived in front of Yun Jiang, he put down Cambrian on his back. At this moment he was slightly out of breath. After 3 days of not sleeping and running back and forth for thousands of miles, even a heavenly meridian warrior would feel a little tired. Cambrian saw Yun Jiang and said happily, "Master." Yun Jiang looked at him up and down. Seeing that no one had done anything to him, he nodded and said, "You don't need to go back to the academy. In the next few days, you will follow me and cultivate." Cambrian said loudly, "Yes, master." Mountain Elder Zheng waited for his breath to calm down, then he cupped his hands and asked, "Mr. Yun, you have caught these two people, how do you want to deal with them?" Yun Jiang said, "I still have use for these two people. Mountain Elder Zheng, you can go back first. If someone wants to find them, just tell them to come and find me." Mountain Elder Zheng was also helpless. At this moment he could not do anything with his current strength. After giving a few words of advice, he flew up into the sky and left. Yun Jiang turned around and looked at the lake. After Cambrian came back, one of his worries had been resolved. However, this fellow was seriously injured, and it was hard to say whether he would wake up in half a year. He thought to himself, "It seems that I have to make some preparations first." He checked the Qianquan sleeve and made up his mind. He called Cambrian in front of him and said, "There may be strong enemies coming. I need to set up a big formation here. Look after those two people for me. Remember, no matter what they say, don't pay attention to them." Chapter 1464. Yun Jiang sent the news back to the 9 continents. Meng Zhen felt that there were too many things involved, and he couldn't handle it alone, so he went to report to Sect Master Qin. Sect Master Qin heard this and said, "We need to invite the Venerable Ones to discuss this. Jita, send a message to invite them." Meng Zhen bowed and said, "Disciple will go now." Not long after, several spiritual messages flew out from the Yutsong sect, heading towards the location of the 6 spiritual sects and the Shaoqing sect. There was another one heading towards the Mystic Essence small domain. Mountain River Child received the message and didn't dare to delay. He immediately came to Zhang Yan's side and bowed. "Master, the Venerable Ones have invited you to discuss the Jiahua realm. There is a message here." As he said this, a spiritual light appeared in his palm. Zhang Yan's gaze swept across the area, and the spiritual light flew into the space between his eyebrows. After a while, he knew what was going on, so he performed a few incantations on the dragon's heart. He also ordered the Mountain River Boy to stay here and look after it carefully. With a thought, he left the small world and transformed into a beam of green light, heading toward the Great Hall of the Heaven Patching Formation. He walked into the hall and greeted Sect Leader Qin and Reverend Meng. Sect Master Qin said, "Hall Master Duzhen, please take a seat first. We will discuss this matter when the 2 sects arrive." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bowed before returning to his seat and sitting down. After waiting for half a day, Yu Xianxiao, Ying Chuanqiu, and Xue Dingyuan arrived one after another. After greeting each other, they also sat down. Sect Master Qin said, Jida's message said that the reason for inviting you here is because of the change in the Jiahua realm. Jida, tell the Venerable Ones. Meng Zhen bowed to the Venerable Ones and said, the disciple who entered the realm said that the Jiahua realm's spiritual opportunity is not as good as it was in the past. It is far inferior to the mountain and sea realm. If that is the case, it is not worth going there and we can give it up. But now there is a change. After pausing for a moment, he said with a slightly heavy voice, that disciple found out that there is a realm above the horned flower realm called the Yunshu realm. Moreover, he has already captured 2 disciples from this realm. Among the crowd, Zhang Yan already knew about this news. However, Yu Xianxiao, Xue Dingyuan, and the others were slightly stunned. Under normal circumstances, the spiritual opportunity that could be called the upper realm was flourishing, and its strength was most likely not weak. Yu Xianxiao raised his brows and said, could it be that the Jiahua realm has been occupied by another realm like the Misty realm? Meng Zhen replied, we still can't come to a conclusion as of now, but the 2 men that Yun Jiang captured did indeed claim to be so. Meng Zhen, what are their cultivation bases? Asked Xue Dingyuan. Meng Zhen said, according to Yun Jiang, these 2 people also cultivate the Qi Dao. They should be in the core transformation stage. However, there is one thing worth noting. These 2 people seem to not need to cross the void primordial sea to travel between the upper and lower realms. Xue Dingyuan was a little surprised. He first thought of something similar to the pure azure sky, so he asked, they don't need to cross the void primordial sea. Could it be that they are in a realm? Meng Zhen said, the disciple who came down from the Yunshu realm claimed that there are dozens of lower realms. If they are in a realm, then the Jiahua realm is likely to have been divided into dozens of unconnected continents. Based on the current situation of the Jiahua realm, this is possible. However, if they are not in a realm, then the people in this realm might have a method that allows them to cross the heavens and reach that place without passing through the void primordial sea. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Sect leader Yun said that the Jiahua realm was once ravaged by a different race called Lu, which forced the Cloud Whale clan to migrate. After Yun Jiang arrived, these different races disappeared and were occupied by people similar to me. These people and the so-called people from the upper realms are most likely from the outer world. Sect leader Qin said, they claim to have a cultivator who can destroy a realm. If there really is such a person, then they can indeed do this. According to him, the Yunshu realm has dozens of lower realms. Even if it is an exaggeration, there should be several lower realms. Such a powerful person can't just use his divine ability. It is very likely that he relied on the help of an artifact to send 2 juniors here. The hearts of the Zhen clan's people moved slightly. No one in the 9 continents could refine such an artifact. If there really was such a powerful person, then he could take it out just now. At the same time, they thought that if the sects in the 9 continents also had such an artifact, then they wouldn't need to cross the void primordial sea to go to other realms. Even the juniors could come and go smoothly. Zhang Yan then asked, Meng Zhen, how is Yun Jiang going to deal with these 2? Meng Zhen said, I tried to persuade him to come back, but he seems to have a clan member who is still unconscious and can't leave for the time being. He said he would have to wait for another half a year. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and didn't ask any more. Since this was Yun Jiang's own choice, then he had to bear the consequences of his own choice. Sect Master Qin then said, the matter of Jiahua realm is already clear. Then why don't the Zhen clan have a discussion about how we should treat the people of this realm in the future? Everyone started to think. Sitting here, no one believed that the force that ruled over the many lower realms would be kind people. At present, the people of this realm were no threat to the 9 continents, but no one knew what would happen in the future. Xue Dingyuan was the first to speak. Among our sects, in terms of scouting and concealment techniques, no one can compare to Taoist Sima. This Xue thinks that there is no harm in summoning Taoist Sima back and have him find a way to enter this realm. Zhang Yan said, "A few days ago, I heard from the people below that there are many evil remnants in Junchen realm that haven't been quelled. Right now, Taoist Sima is helping the cultivators of the 9 continents to chase after these people. Right now, he should be at a critical juncture. Summoning him back now might not be the right time." Shui Dingyuan nodded and said, "We can wait for Taoist Sima to come back before doing this. Right now, this realm still doesn't know the existence of the 9 continents, so there is no need to be so anxious." Zhang Yan thought for a while and felt that it was feasible. Sect Master Qin asked, "Sect Master Yu, what do you mean?" Yu Xianshao said, "The situation is not clear, so it is inconvenient to act rashly." Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "Then when the matter of Junchen realm is settled, we will summon Taoist Sima back." In Jiaohua realm, Yun Jiang waited for more than 100 days, but he still didn't see his clansmen wake up. Moreover, when he looked closely, he found that his recovery was extremely slow. Even if he woke up, he couldn't travel through the void realm. He would need to rest for more than 10 years before he could recover. Facing this kind of situation, he needed to think about how to face the possible danger that might come. Half a year was about to pass. If the Great Might Heavenly Palace discovered that their disciple hadn't returned after so long, they would definitely send someone over to check. However, it was a bad idea to directly face them. If he wasn't careful, he might even attract the attention of the other party. There were 2 main problems in front of him that needed to be solved. One was to figure out the background of Yunshu realm, and the other was to protect the lives of his clansmen. After thinking hard for a few days, he finally came up with a solution. He thought to himself, "Although this method is a little risky, and my life might be in danger at any time, if I do it well, not only can I find out the origin of the so-called upper realm, but I can also protect the lives of my clansmen." He almost instantly made up his mind. He stood up from the praying mat and walked towards the woodshed. After pushing the door open, Hanwu was looking at him with a vigilant expression. Seeing that it was him, he relaxed and bowed, "Teacher." Yun Jiang grunted and said, "Disciple, you go out first. I have something to say to this person." Hanwu said yes and left. Yun Jiang looked at Zhan Moping. The latter had been detained for more than 3 months. Although he didn't suffer any torture, his body couldn't move, and he couldn't regulate his breathing. His spirit was a little sluggish, and he was no longer the energetic young man he used to be. Yun Jiang sat down in front of this person and pointed at him. He undid some of the restraints on him and said, "I can let you go, but you have to promise me one thing." Zhan Moping's body shook as if he had recovered his strength in an instant. He tried to sit up and looked straight at Yun Jiang. He asked, "What is it?" Yun Jiang said, "I need you to sign a contract with me. When you go back, you must not reveal my existence." Zhan Moping thought about it and said reluctantly, "It's a little difficult, but I'll think of a way to hide it." Yun Jiang said, "What's difficult? Is it your junior sister?" Zhan Moping shook his head and said, "Junior sister Su is not a problem. I believe you can convince her. It's just that we've been delaying for so long. If we can't do anything, we need a credible reason. The palace will definitely find a way to investigate, so it's hard to do it properly." He wasn't thinking for Yun Jiang's sake, but for his own. If the palace found out about this, wouldn't he be in trouble as well? Yun Jiang said, "There's no harm in that. I've thought of a way for you. You can take the ancient demonic whale back with you. That way, you'll have an explanation." Zhan Moping said in disbelief, "You're willing to let us take the ancient demonic whale back?" He was a little confused. If the other party was willing, why did they have to go through so much trouble? Yun Jiang waved his hand and said, "Wait, this Yun has conditions. You need to guarantee that the demonic whale will not be harmed in the slightest. You also need to make an oath about this." Zhan Moping didn't understand why Yun Jiang wanted to do this, but escaping was his priority at the moment. Everything else could be put aside. He thought for a moment and said, "We came here because we know that this ancient demonic whale can attract our kin with its bloodline. It's best to kill it and be done with it. However, if the whale is willing to recognize me and my junior sister as its master, the elders won't make things difficult for us when we return to the palace." Yun Jiang said, I am unable to make the ancient demonic whale recognize you as its master. Why don't we do it this way? Let it sign the contract. It will not do such a thing, but it will be your protector. What do you think? Jean Moping pondered for a moment and nodded. That's fine. He was overjoyed. If he could have an ancient demonic whale as his protector, the result would be even better than before. Yun Jiang stood up and said, I'll bring your junior sister here. You'll be responsible for convincing her. You are her senior brothers, so this shouldn't be difficult. Jean Moping smiled wryly and said, All right, leave this matter to me. Yun Jiang walked out of the woodshed with a strange glint in his eyes. His plan was to keep his kin here in secret while he would change back to his original form and head to Yunshu Jie in their place. He would follow Jean Moping and the others to investigate this world. If he wasn't careful, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. However, if he succeeded, it would be an unprecedented merit. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.